Beneath the waves of the East China Sea, off the southernmost tip of Japan, lies a structure so massive, so geometrically precise, and so breathtakingly mysterious that it has divided the scientific world for nearly 4 decades. It is a monument that should not exist. It is a formation that defies easy explanation. And it is a discovery that, if proven to be what many believe it is, would rewrite everything we think we know about human civilization, about the ancient world, and about the very timeline of history itself. This is the Yonaguni Monument. This is Japan's underwater pyramid city. And this is a story that will challenge everything you thought you understood about the deep past. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. The ocean is the greatest keeper of secrets on this planet. More than 70% of the Earth's surface lies beneath water, and of that vast submerged realm we have explored less than we have explored the surface of the moon. Every year the sea gives up fragments of its hidden history, a shipwreck here, a submerged cave painting there, a drowned coastline emerging from the murk of time. But nothing the ocean has ever revealed has been quite like what waits in the waters surrounding the tiny Japanese island of Yonaguni. Yonaguni is a place most people have never heard of. It is the westernmost inhabited island in all of Japan, a small, windswept speck of land sitting at the far southwestern edge of the Ryukyu archipelago, closer to Taiwan than to the Japanese mainland, closer to the Philippines than to Tokyo. It is a place of rugged cliffs, of crashing surf, of warm subtropical currents that bring hammerhead sharks in great spiraling schools during the winter months. It is a place where fewer than 2,000 people live, most of them making their living from fishing, from small-scale agriculture, and from the production of a fiercely potent local liquor called hanazake. It is, by almost every conventional measure, one of the most remote and overlooked corners of the Japanese nation. And yet beneath the turquoise waters that lap against its southern shore, there lies something that has drawn scientists, archaeologists, geologists, divers, historians, filmmakers, and dreamers from every corner of the globe. Something that has sparked arguments in academic journals and documentaries aired in dozens of languages. Something that, depending on whom you ask, is either the most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century or one of the most spectacular geological formations ever found on the ocean floor. The story of the Yonaguni Monument begins, as so many great stories of discovery do, not with a scientist or an explorer, but with an ordinary person doing ordinary work who happened to look in the right place at the right time. The year was 1986. The place was the waters off Arakawa, the southernmost cape of Yonaguni Island. A local diving instructor named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the seafloor in search of new dive sites. Aratake was a man who knew these waters intimately. He had spent years guiding tourists and sport divers through the reefs and underwater landscapes surrounding his home island. He knew where the hammerhead sharks gathered. He knew where the coral was most vibrant. He knew the currents, the tides, the moods of this particular stretch of ocean. But on this day, Aratake ventured beyond the areas he typically frequented. He swam further south, beyond the established dive routes, into waters he had not thoroughly explored before. What he found there stopped him cold. Rising from the sandy ocean floor at a depth of roughly 25 meters, about 75 to 80 feet below the surface, was an enormous structure of stone, not a jumble of boulders. Not a natural reef formation, not the crumbled remains of a cliff face that had fallen into the sea. What Aratake saw was something that looked, unmistakably and undeniably, like architecture. Flat, horizontal surfaces stretched out in vast terraces, one stacked above another, like the steps of a colossal staircase built for giants. Sharp right angles cut through the rock with a precision that seemed impossible for nature to achieve. Straight edges ran for meters upon meters without deviation. Walls rose vertically from flat platforms. Channels and grooves carved their way through the stone in patterns that suggested intention, design, purpose. Aratake was not a geologist. He was not an archaeologist. He was a diver, a man who made his living showing people the wonders of the underwater world. But he knew stone, he knew coral, He knew what natural rock formations looked like after years of erosion by currents and waves, and what he was looking at did not look natural. It looked built. It looked carved, it looked, in a word that would come to define the entire debate surrounding this site, artificial. He surfaced that day with his mind racing and his heart pounding. He told friends, fellow divers, local fishermen. Some were skeptical, some were curious, some dismissed him outright, but Aratake was persistent. He returned to the site again and again, each time seeing more, each time becoming more convinced that what lay beneath the waves off Yonaguni was something extraordinary. He began photographing the formation. He began mapping its contours in his mind, and he began telling anyone who would listen that there was something beneath the sea near his island that the world needed to see. It would take time, years, in fact, for the world to pay attention. But when it did, the Yonaguni Monument would become one of the most debated, most controversial, and most fascinating mysteries in all of modern science. To understand why the Yonaguni Monument provoked such intense interest and such fierce disagreement, one must first understand what precisely lies on the ocean floor off the southern coast of this tiny island. The main structure, the feature most commonly referred to as the Yonaguni Monument, or in some accounts, the Yonaguni submarine ruins, is a massive, roughly rectangular formation of sandstone and mudstone that measures approximately 150 meters in length and 40 meters in width. It rises from the seabed to a height of roughly 27 meters, with its highest point reaching to within about 5 meters of the ocean's surface. In terms of sheer scale, it is enormous, comparable in size to a large stepped pyramid, a ziggurat, or a terraced temple complex. The most striking feature of the monument is its series of broad, flat terraces. These terraces are stacked one above another in a pattern that is strikingly regular. Each terrace is roughly horizontal, with surfaces that appear smooth and level. The edges where one terrace meets the next are sharp and well-defined, often forming what appear to be perfect right angles. Some of these steps are relatively small, perhaps a meter or so in height, while others are much larger, rising 2 or 3 meters from one level to the next. The overall effect is that of a massive staircase or a stepped pyramid, with each level slightly smaller than the one below it, creating a tiered structure that narrows as it rises toward the surface. But the terraces are only the beginning. As divers explored the monument more thoroughly in the years following Aratake's initial discovery, they found a wealth of additional features that deepened the mystery and intensified the debate. There are what appear to be wide, flat platforms, broad horizontal surfaces that stretch out like plazas or ceremonial gathering places. There are narrow channels and grooves carved into the stone, running in straight lines that seem too regular and too precisely oriented to be the product of random erosion. There are what some observers have described as pillars or columns, vertical stone features that stand apart from the main body of the formation. There are triangular depressions and pools cut into flat surfaces. There are features that resemble drainage channels or water conduits, designed to direct the flow of water across the surface of the structure. There are what appear to be roads or pathways, flat-bottomed channels wide enough for several people to walk abreast, running along the base of the monument and connecting different sections of the formation. And then there are the features that, for many observers, tip the balance from geological curiosity to archaeological wonder. Near the base of the main structure, divers discovered what has been described as a face, a large, flat surface of stone on which there appear to be carved features resembling eyes, a nose, and a mouth. The face is not small. It is several meters across, and its features, while eroded and softened by millennia of submersion, are distinct enough to be recognizable in photographs and video footage. Whether this face is a genuine carving or a product of natural erosion and pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces and patterns in random shapes has been one of the most emotionally charged points of contention in the entire Yonaguni debate. Near the monument, divers have also found what appear to be smaller, separate structures, features that some researchers have interpreted as walls, foundations, or the remains of buildings. There are circular depressions in the stone that some have compared to post holes, the kinds of holes that would be left if wooden posts had once been driven into the rock to support a roof or a canopy. There are stones that appear to have been shaped or dressed, their surfaces smoothed, and their edges straightened in ways that suggest deliberate human modification. And then there is the feature that has come to be known as the turtle. Near the western edge of the main monument, there is a large, rounded stone formation that bears a remarkable resemblance to a sea turtle. Its shape is so distinct, so lifelike, that it is difficult to attribute it to coincidence. The turtle appears to have a clearly defined head, flippers, and shell, and it sits in a position that seems almost deliberate, as though it were placed there or carved there with intention. Taken individually, any one of these features might be dismissed as a geological quirk, a trick of erosion, a coincidence of form. But taken together, viewed as parts of a single, integrated complex, the features of the Yonaguni Monument present a picture that is difficult to reconcile with purely natural processes. The sheer number of right angles, flat surfaces, straight edges, and symmetrical forms concentrated in a single location and arranged in what appears to be a coherent, organized pattern has led many observers to conclude that, whatever the Yonaguni Monument is, it is not simply a rock formation that happens to look interesting. It is, they argue, evidence of human activity on a scale and at a date that challenges the conventional understanding of ancient history. The first scientist to take a serious, sustained interest in the Yonaguni Monument was a man named Masaaki Kimura. Kimura was a professor of marine geology at the University of the Ryukyu in Okinawa, one of the most respected institutions of higher learning in the Japanese island chain. He was not a fringe figure. He was not an amateur. He was a credentialed, published, peer-reviewed scientist with decades of experience studying the geology and underwater landscapes of the Ryukyu archipelago. And when he first dove on the Yonaguni Monument in the late 1980s, he came to a conclusion that would define his career and ignite a controversy that has not been resolved to this day. Kimura concluded that the Yonaguni Monument was, at least in part, a man-made structure. He did not claim that it was built entirely from scratch, that ancient builders had quarried stone and stacked it block by block like the pyramids of Egypt. What he proposed was something more nuanced and in some ways more provocative. He argued that the monument was a natural rock formation that had been extensively modified by human hands, carved, shaped, terraced, and sculpted into its present form by a civilization that existed thousands of years ago, when the site was still above water. Kimura spent years, decades, in fact, studying the monument. He made hundreds of dives. He took thousands of photographs. He created detailed maps and diagrams of the formation, cataloging every terrace, every step, every channel, every groove, every apparent carving. He measured angles. He analyzed stone composition. He compared the features of the monument to known geological processes and to known examples of ancient architecture from around the world. And the more he studied, the more convinced he became that the monument could not be explained by geology alone. His argument rested on several key observations. First, there was the matter of the right angles. Natural erosion, Kimura noted, tends to produce rounded, irregular shapes. Water and wind smooth stone over time, wearing away sharp edges and creating curves and undulations. The Yonaguni Monument, by contrast, is dominated by sharp, well-defined right angles, places where horizontal surfaces meet vertical surfaces at angles that are very close to 90 degrees. While it is not impossible for natural processes to produce right angles in stone, certain types of rock do fracture along flat plains, creating angular shapes. The sheer concentration of right angles at the Yonaguni site, Kimura argued, was far beyond what could reasonably be expected from natural fracturing alone. Second, there was the regularity of the terraces. The stepped formation of the monument is remarkably consistent. The terraces are roughly uniform in width and height, and they are oriented in the same direction, creating a pattern that is strikingly similar to the stepped pyramids and terraced temple platforms found in cultures around the world. Natural rock formations can sometimes create terrace-like features through differential erosion, where harder layers of rock resist erosion more than softer layers, creating a staircase effect. But Kimura pointed out that the terraces at Yonaguni are more regular, more symmetrical, and more consistently spaced than what is typically seen in naturally terraced rock. Third, there were the channels and grooves. Kimura identified numerous features that he interpreted as deliberately carved channels, narrow, straight-sided grooves cut into the surface of the stone. Some of these channels appeared to run in parallel lines, others intersected at right angles. Some appeared to connect different levels of the monument, as though they had been designed to carry water from one terrace to another. Kimura argued that these channels were too regular, too precisely oriented, and too clearly functional in their design to be the products of natural erosion. Fourth, there were the features that appeared to have been carved or shaped to represent recognizable forms, the face, the turtle, and other formations that seemed to depict animals, symbols, or human figures. Kimura was cautious about some of these identifications, acknowledging that pareidolia could play a role in how observers interpreted certain shapes. But he argued that at least some of these features showed clear evidence of deliberate carving, tool marks, symmetrical proportions, and levels of detail that went beyond what natural erosion could produce. Fifth, and perhaps most compellingly, Kimura pointed to the overall coherence of the site. It was not simply that individual features of the monument looked artificial. It was that all of these features, the terraces, the platforms, the channels, the carvings, the pathways, appeared to be parts of a single, integrated design. They were oriented in consistent directions. They were connected by what appeared to be deliberate pathways and transitions. They created spaces, open plazas, enclosed chambers, elevated platforms that seemed to have been designed for specific purposes. In short, the monument did not look like a random collection of geological curiosities. It looked like a complex. It looked like a site that had been planned, designed, and built by people who had a vision for what they wanted to create. Kimura published his findings in scientific journals, presented them at conferences, and wrote books detailing his research. He proposed that the monument was the remains of a city or a ceremonial complex that had been built by an ancient civilization during the last ice age, when sea levels were significantly lower than they are today, and the site would have been on dry land. He estimated the age of the monument at somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 years, based on calculations of when sea levels in the region would have been low enough for the site to be above water. If he was right, the Yonaguni Monument would predate the earliest known civilizations of the ancient world, predating Sumer, predating Egypt, predating the Indus Valley, predating everything that the conventional historical timeline identified as the beginning of complex, organized human society. It was a staggering claim, and it did not go unchallenged. The most prominent and most articulate critic of Kimura's interpretation was Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University who had already made a name for himself with controversial claims about the age of the Great Sphinx of Egypt. Schoch was no stranger to debates about the antiquity of ancient monuments, and he approached the Yonaguni Monument with a combination of genuine scientific curiosity and rigorous skepticism. Schoch dove on the monument himself, examining its features firsthand. He studied Kimura's photographs, maps, and measurements. He analyzed the geological composition of the stone and the processes that had shaped it over millennia, and he came to a conclusion that was almost diametrically opposed to Kimura's. Schoch argued that the Yonaguni Monument was a natural geological formation. He did not deny that it was remarkable, that it was visually striking, or that its features bore an uncanny resemblance to architecture. But he maintained that every feature of the monument could be explained by known geological processes without invoking human intervention. His argument centered on the specific type of rock from which the monument is formed. The Yonaguni Monument is composed primarily of sandstone and mudstone, sedimentary rocks that were laid down in horizontal layers over millions of years. These layers, Schoch explained, are not uniform in their composition. Some layers are harder and more resistant to erosion than others. When these layered rocks are exposed to the forces of erosion, waves, currents, chemical dissolution, the softer layers erode more quickly than the harder layers, creating a natural stepped or terraced effect. This process, known as differential erosion, is well documented in geology and can produce remarkably regular, staircase-like formations without any human involvement. Schoch further pointed out that sandstone and mudstone often fracture along flat plains, a property known as jointing. These joints tend to form at regular angles, often at or near 90 degrees, because of the way stress is distributed within the rock. When erosion exploits these natural joints, the result can be sharp, angular features, right angles, flat surfaces, straight edges that look, to the untrained eye, as though they were carved by human hands but are in fact the products of entirely natural geological processes. The channels and grooves that Kimura had identified as evidence of deliberate carving, Schoch argued, were consistent with natural erosion along joints and fracture lines. Water flowing over stone will naturally seek out lines of weakness, carving channels along cracks and joints in the rock. These channels can be remarkably straight and regular, especially when they follow the linear geometry of the rock's natural fracture patterns. As for the face, the turtle, and other apparently representational features, Schoch attributed them to pareidolia, the well-documented human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns, especially faces and animals, in random or ambiguous visual stimuli. The human brain is wired to recognize faces. It is an evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors identify friends, foes, and potential mates in complex visual environments. But this same wiring means that we often see faces where none exist, in clouds, in rock formations, in the patterns of bark on a tree. Schoch argued that the features of the Yonaguni Monument that appeared to depict faces or animals were simply cases of pareidolia on a grand scale, natural rock formations that, by coincidence, happened to resemble recognizable shapes. Schoch also challenged Kimura's claim that the overall coherence of the site was evidence of design. Complex, organized-looking formations, he argued, can arise from natural processes without any guiding intelligence. The laws of physics and chemistry, operating on specific types of rock under specific environmental conditions, can produce results that are remarkably regular and geometrically precise. The fact that the Yonaguni Monument looked like a designed complex did not mean that it was one. Finally, Schoch noted that no unambiguous artifacts had been found at the Yonaguni site, no pottery, no tools, no inscriptions, no human remains, no objects that could be definitively identified as the products of human manufacture. If the monument had been a city or a ceremonial complex, one would expect to find some trace of the people who built it and lived there, some fragment of their material culture. The absence of such artifacts, Schoch argued, was a significant point against the hypothesis that the monument was man-made. Schoch's critique was detailed, well-reasoned, and grounded in established geological science. It was persuasive to many geologists and skeptics, and it effectively shifted the burden of proof to those who claimed the monument was artificial. But it did not settle the debate. If anything, it intensified it. Because there were aspects of the Yonaguni Monument that even Schoch had difficulty fully explaining within a purely natural framework. The regularity of the terraces, for example, was hard to account for entirely through differential erosion. While it was true that layered sedimentary rocks could produce stepped formations, the terraces at Yonaguni were more regular, more symmetrical, and more consistently spaced than most naturally terraced rock formations found elsewhere in the world. The steps were remarkably uniform in height, the platforms were remarkably level. The overall geometry of the formation was remarkably coherent. This degree of regularity was not impossible in nature, but it was unusual and it demanded explanation. The right angles, too, were challenging. While jointing could produce angular features, the concentration of near-perfect right angles at the Yonaguni site was exceptional. In most naturally jointed rock formations, the angles between fracture planes vary, some are close to 90 degrees, but many are not. At Yonaguni, the preponderance of right angles was striking, and it was difficult to attribute it entirely to the coincidental alignment of natural fracture planes. And then there were the features that did not fit neatly into any geological model. There was, for example, a feature near the monument that had been dubbed the stage, a large, flat, roughly rectangular platform that sat at the base of the main structure, separated from it by a narrow gap. The stage was remarkably level, remarkably flat, and remarkably regular in its outline. It did not appear to be connected to the main monument by any natural geological process. It looked to many observers like an independent structure, a platform or a foundation that had been built or carved separately from the main formation. There was also a feature known as the Loop Road, a narrow, flat-bottomed channel that ran along the base of the monument in a roughly circular or semicircular path. The Loop Road was remarkable for its consistency. Its width was roughly uniform along its entire length. Its bottom was flat and level. Its walls were vertical and straight. It looked to many observers like a deliberately constructed pathway, a road or a processional route that had been carved into the rock to provide access to different parts of the monument. And there were the two large, roughly circular holes near the top of the monument that some researchers had identified as post holes, cavities that appeared to have been drilled or carved into the stone to hold wooden posts or columns. These holes were remarkably regular in their shape and depth, and they were positioned symmetrically relative to each other and to the overall structure of the monument. If they were post holes, they would constitute some of the strongest evidence for human involvement at the site, because there is no known natural process that produces symmetrically placed, regularly shaped cylindrical cavities in flat stone surfaces. Kimura pointed to all of these features as evidence that the monument could not be explained by geology alone. He acknowledged that the underlying rock formation was natural, that the basic structure of the sandstone and mudstone was the product of millions of years of geological processes. But he insisted that someone at some point in the distant past had taken that natural formation and modified it, carving terraces, cutting channels, shaping faces, drilling holes, and transforming a natural rock outcrop into a monumental structure with purpose and meaning. This was the crux of the Yonaguni debate, not whether the monument was entirely natural or entirely artificial, but whether it was a natural formation that had been modified by human hands. And this was a much harder question to answer, because the line between natural rock and modified rock can be exceedingly difficult to draw, especially when the modification is thousands of years old and has been subjected to millennia of underwater erosion. To fully appreciate the significance of the Yonaguni Monument and the claims made about it, one must understand the geological and climatic context in which it exists, and that means understanding the last ice age. The Earth's climate has not been constant over the course of its history. It has oscillated between warm periods and cold periods, between greenhouse conditions and ice ages, over cycles spanning tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. The most recent ice age, known formally as the last glacial period, began roughly 115,000 years ago and ended roughly 11,700 years ago. During this period, vast ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere, extending across what is now northern Europe, northern Asia, and large portions of the landmass that surrounds the North Atlantic and North Pacific. These ice sheets were enormous. At their maximum extent, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, a period known as the last glacial maximum, the ice sheets covered an area of roughly 26 million square kilometers. They were up to 3 or 4 kilometers thick in some places, and they contained a staggering amount of water that had been drawn from the oceans by evaporation, carried over the continents as precipitation, and locked up in solid ice. The consequence of this massive transfer of water from ocean to ice was a dramatic drop in global sea levels. At the peak of the last glacial maximum, sea levels around the world were roughly 120 to 130 meters lower than they are today. 120 meters is nearly 400 feet. That is a difference sufficient to transform the geography of the planet. Coastlines that exist today did not exist then. Lands that are now submerged were then exposed. Islands that are now separated by water were then connected by dry land. The English Channel did not exist. Britain was connected to mainland Europe by a broad plain of grassland and forest known as Doggerland. The Bering Strait did not exist. Asia was connected to North America by a vast land bridge called Beringia. The islands of Southeast Asia, Borneo, Java, Sumatra, were connected to the Asian mainland by a continuous stretch of dry land known as Sundaland. And in the waters around Japan, the picture was similarly transformed. During the last glacial maximum, the sea level around Yonaguni Island was low enough that the island was not an island at all. It was part of a much larger landmass, a broad, continuous stretch of dry land that extended from the Ryukyu archipelago to Taiwan and beyond. The shallow seas that now separate these islands did not exist. The continental shelf, the gently sloping underwater extension of the continent, was exposed, creating vast plains of habitable land that are now hidden beneath the waves. And this is the key point for the Yonaguni Monument. If the monument is indeed an artificial structure, if it was carved or built by human hands, then it was created at a time when the site was above water, on dry land, accessible to the people who shaped it. And for the site to have been above water, sea levels would have had to have been at least 25 to 30 meters lower than they are today, because the top of the monument sits at a depth of about 5 meters below the current sea surface, and its base is at a depth of about 25 to 27 meters. Sea level data for the Ryukyu region indicates that the area around the monument was above water as recently as about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, and possibly even more recently, depending on local geological factors such as tectonic uplift or subsidence. This means that if the monument was built by human hands, it was built sometime before about 8,000 years ago, before the rising seas of the post-glacial period submerged it beneath the waves. 8,000 years ago. That is 6,000 years before the birth of Christ. That is 3,000 years before the construction of the Great Pyramid at Giza. That is 2,000 years before the emergence of Sumerian civilization in Mesopotamia. That is a date so early that, according to the conventional archaeological timeline, no human society anywhere on Earth was building monumental stone structures. The earliest known examples of monumental architecture, the temples of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, date to roughly 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, and even those are controversial, representing a dramatic revision of what we thought we knew about the capabilities of prehistoric peoples. If the Yonaguni Monument is a man-made structure dating to 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, it would be one of the oldest, perhaps the oldest, monumental structure in the world. This is why the Yonaguni debate matters. This is why it has generated such passion, such controversy, and such division. It is not simply a question about a rock formation on the ocean floor. It is a question about the history of human civilization itself. To understand who might have built the Yonaguni Monument, if indeed it was built, one must look at the archaeological record of the region. And that means looking at the Jōmon people. The Jōmon culture is one of the most remarkable and least widely known civilizations of the ancient world. It flourished in the Japanese archipelago for an astonishingly long period, from roughly 16,000 years ago to about 3,000 years ago, making it one of the longest-lasting cultural traditions in human history. The name Jōmon, which means cord-marked, refers to the distinctive patterns found on the culture's pottery, which was created by pressing cords or ropes into the surface of wet clay before firing. And it is the pottery that makes the Jōmon culture so significant. Jōmon pottery is among the oldest pottery ever found anywhere in the world. Fragments of Jōmon pottery have been dated to roughly 16,000 years ago, and some estimates push that date back even further, to as early as 17,000 years ago. This means that the Jōmon people were making pottery thousands of years before the development of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, thousands of years before the rise of the first cities, thousands of years before almost any other culture on Earth had figured out how to shape and fire clay into durable vessels. The significance of this cannot be overstated. Pottery is not a simple technology. It requires an understanding of clay composition, of firing temperatures, of the properties of different materials. It requires the ability to plan ahead, to gather materials, prepare them, shape them, and then subject them to a controlled process of heating that transforms soft, malleable clay into hard, durable ceramic. The fact that the Jōmon people developed this technology so early suggests a level of sophistication, ingenuity, and cultural complexity that is far beyond what is typically associated with prehistoric hunter-gatherer societies. And the Jōmon people were, by all evidence, primarily hunter-gatherers. They did not practice large-scale agriculture. They did not build cities in the conventional sense. They did not develop writing. But they did something that was, in many ways, equally remarkable. They created a complex, stable, successful society that endured for more than 13,000 years without the need for the agricultural revolution that is typically considered the prerequisite for civilization. The Jōmon people lived in settled or semi-settled communities. They built pit houses, dwellings excavated partially into the ground and roofed with thatch or bark. They created elaborate stone tools, including finely crafted arrowheads, scrapers, and grinding stones. They made jewelry and ornaments from shell, bone, stone, and jade. They developed sophisticated fishing technologies, including hooks, nets, and harpoons. They harvested shellfish, collected nuts and seeds, and hunted deer, boar, and other game. And they created some of the most beautiful and artistically accomplished pottery the ancient world has ever seen, vessels decorated with intricate, flowing, almost Baroque designs that suggest a rich aesthetic sensibility and a deep engagement with artistic expression. But the Jōmon people also did something else that is directly relevant to the Yonaguni debate. They built stone structures, not pyramids, not ziggurats. Not monumental architecture on the scale of ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, but they did create organized stone arrangements, circles, alignments, platforms, and other configurations of stone that suggest ritual or ceremonial purpose. The most famous of these is the Oyu stone circles in Akita Prefecture, a site dating to roughly 4,000 years ago that features two large circles of carefully arranged stones, complete with a central pillar and radiating lines that some researchers have compared to a sundial or a calendar. The existence of Jōmon stone arrangements is significant because it demonstrates that the Jōmon people had the knowledge, the skills, and the cultural motivation to work with stone on a large scale. They understood how to select, transport, and arrange stones in organized patterns. They had a concept of design, an ability to envision a structure, and then bring it into being through coordinated effort. If any prehistoric culture in the Japanese archipelago had the capability to modify a natural rock formation into a monumental structure, the Jōmon people are the most likely candidates. But could the Jōmon people have created something on the scale of the Yonaguni Monument? That is a much harder question. The Yonaguni Monument is enormous. Even if it was not built from scratch, even if it was, as Kimura proposed, a natural formation that was modified by human hands, the scale of the modification implied by Kimura's theory is staggering. Carving terraces, cutting channels, shaping faces, drilling holes, all of this would have required an immense amount of labor, a high degree of organizational skill, and sophisticated stoneworking techniques. It would have required a large, well-organized workforce operating under some form of centralized direction. It would have required, in short, exactly the kind of social complexity that the Jōmon culture is not typically credited with. But this is where the Yonaguni debate intersects with a larger question about the ancient past, a question that has been gaining momentum in archaeological circles in recent years. That question is simply this: have we underestimated the capabilities of prehistoric peoples? For most of the 20th century, the prevailing view in archaeology was that complex civilization, cities, monumental architecture, organized religion, social stratification, was a relatively recent development, emerging only after the invention of agriculture around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. Before agriculture, so the theory went, humans lived in small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers who lacked the resources, the population density, and the social organization needed to undertake large-scale construction projects. The conventional timeline placed the earliest monumental architecture at around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, with the construction of the first pyramids in Egypt and the first temples in Mesopotamia. This view began to crumble in the 1990s with the excavation of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Göbekli Tepe is a site that features massive stone pillars, some of them over 5 meters tall and weighing up to 10 tons, arranged in circles and decorated with elaborate carvings of animals, symbols, and abstract patterns. The site has been dated to roughly 11,000 to 12,000 years ago, making it far older than Stonehenge, far older than the pyramids, and far older than any previously known example of monumental architecture. And here is the truly revolutionary aspect of Göbekli Tepe. It was built by hunter-gatherers. There is no evidence of agriculture at the site or in the surrounding region at the time of its construction. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were, by all available evidence, pre-agricultural. They hunted, they gathered, and they built one of the most impressive stone structures the ancient world has ever seen. Göbekli Tepe shattered the assumption that monumental architecture required agriculture. It demonstrated that hunter-gatherer societies were capable of far greater feats of organization, engineering, and artistic expression than had previously been imagined. And it opened the door to the possibility that other, still undiscovered sites from the same period or even earlier might exist, sites that could further revise our understanding of what prehistoric peoples were capable of. The Yonaguni Monument, if it is indeed a man-made or human-modified structure, would fit perfectly into this revised picture of the ancient past. It would be evidence that the Jōmon people, or perhaps some other, as yet unidentified culture in the Western Pacific, were capable of monumental stone working at a date that predates the conventional timeline for such activities. It would extend the revolution begun by Göbekli Tepe to the other side of the world, demonstrating that the capacity for monumental construction was not limited to a single region or a single cultural tradition, but was a widespread, perhaps even universal, aspect of human capability in the deep past. This is the tantalizing possibility that keeps the Yonaguni debate alive. This is the reason that researchers continue to dive on the monument, to study its features, to argue about its origins, and to search for the evidence that might finally resolve the question one way or the other. One of the most significant aspects of the Yonaguni Monument that has fueled the debate is its orientation. Detailed surveys of the formation have revealed that its primary axis, the line along which its terraces and platforms are aligned, runs roughly north-south, with some features aligned to the east-west axis. This orientation is significant because it is consistent with the kinds of orientations found in monumental structures around the world. Ancient builders in many cultures align their structures to the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. This practice is found in the pyramids of Egypt, which are aligned to the cardinal points with remarkable precision. It is found in the temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. It is found in the ceremonial platforms of ancient Polynesia. It is found in the stone circles and henges of the British Isles. The reasons for this alignment varied from culture to culture, but they generally had to do with astronomy, with tracking the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars for agricultural, religious, or navigational purposes. If the Yonaguni Monument is oriented to the cardinal directions, this would be consistent with the hypothesis that it was designed by people who had astronomical knowledge and who incorporated that knowledge into the design of their structure. It would not prove that the monument was artificial. Natural geological processes can, in theory, produce features that happen to be aligned to the cardinal directions, but it would add another piece to the puzzle, another data point that would be difficult to explain within a purely natural framework. Kimura noted the cardinal alignment of the monument and argued that it was evidence of deliberate design. Schoch countered that the alignment could be explained by the orientation of the natural fracture planes in the rock, which are determined by the stresses that the rock has been subjected to over geological time. If the regional tectonic stresses happen to be oriented roughly north-south and east-west, then the natural fracture planes and the features produced by erosion along those planes would naturally be aligned to those directions without any human involvement. This exchange was typical of the Yonaguni debate. Every feature of the monument could be interpreted in two ways, as evidence of human design or as the product of natural processes. Every argument had a counter-argument. Every piece of evidence could be read in two directions. The monument existed in a frustrating gray zone between the natural and the artificial, defying easy categorization and resisting definitive interpretation. But the Yonaguni Monument is not alone. One of the most significant and often overlooked aspects of this story is that the waters around Yonaguni and around other islands in the Ryukyu archipelago contain numerous other underwater formations that also appear to bear the marks of human modification. If the Yonaguni Monument were a unique, isolated anomaly, it might be easier to dismiss it as a geological curiosity. But the fact that similar formations have been found at multiple locations in the same region makes the picture considerably more complex. Off the coast of Chatham on the main island of Okinawa, divers have found what appears to be an underwater wall, a long, straight, vertical stone feature that stretches for a considerable distance along the seafloor. The wall is remarkably uniform in height and thickness, and its surface appears to be smooth and flat, as though it had been dressed or shaped by human hands. Near the wall, divers have found what appear to be stone blocks, large, roughly rectangular pieces of stone that look as though they might have been quarried and placed in position. Off the coast of Kurama, a group of islands about 30 kilometers west of Okinawa, divers have discovered what appear to be underwater stone circles, arrangements of stones that bear a striking resemblance to the stone circles found on land throughout the Japanese archipelago and in other parts of the world. These circles are not random scatterings of rock. They appear to be organized, symmetrical, and deliberate. Near the island of Aguni, divers have found what has been described as an underwater stone platform, a broad, flat, horizontal surface of stone that appears to have been leveled and smoothed, surrounded by what look like retaining walls. And near Yonaguni itself, in addition to the main monument, divers have found several smaller formations that appear to show similar characteristics: flat surfaces, right angles, stepped profiles, and straight-edged channels that seem too regular to be entirely natural. The existence of these multiple sites, spread across a wide area of the Ryukyu archipelago, raises an intriguing possibility. If these formations are all natural, if they are all the products of the same geological processes operating on the same types of rock under the same environmental conditions, then the Ryukyu region would have to be one of the most extraordinary geological provinces on Earth, a place where natural processes routinely produce formations that closely mimic architecture. While this is not impossible, it would be remarkable. If, on the other hand, these formations are evidence of human activity, then they would suggest the existence of a widespread maritime culture in the Ryukyu region during the last ice age, a culture that was capable of stone working on a large scale and that built or modified structures at multiple locations across a broad swath of the Western Pacific. This is a far more dramatic claim, and it carries far more profound implications for our understanding of the ancient past. The question of whether the Yonaguni Monument was built by human hands is intimately connected to a larger question about the role of the sea in human history. For most of the time that modern humans have existed, the roughly 300,000 years since Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa, sea levels have been lower than they are today. The current high sea level is actually anomalous in the context of the last several 100,000 years. For most of the Pleistocene epoch, the geological period that encompasses the ice ages, sea levels were lower, sometimes dramatically lower than they are now. This means that the coastlines of the ancient world were very different from the coastlines we know today. Places that are now underwater were once dry land. Places that are now deep beneath the sea were once beaches, estuaries, river deltas, and coastal plains, exactly the kinds of environments that humans have always preferred to inhabit. Coastal environments are extraordinarily productive. They offer access to marine resources, fish, shellfish, seaweed, sea mammals, as well as to terrestrial resources, game, plants, fresh water. They are natural corridors for travel and migration, allowing people to move along the coast without having to cross difficult inland terrain. They are places where different ecosystems meet, creating zones of exceptional biodiversity and resource availability. For all of these reasons, coastal environments have been magnets for human settlement throughout history. But when sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, a process that began roughly 20,000 years ago and continued until roughly 6,000 years ago, these coastal settlements were inundated. The rising seas swallowed everything: the homes, the hearths, the tools, the temples, the monuments, the middens, the graves. Entire landscapes that had been inhabited for thousands of years were drowned beneath meters, sometimes tens of meters of seawater. The implications of this for archaeology are profound. If ancient peoples lived primarily along coastlines, as many researchers believe they did, then the archaeological record of their existence would be concentrated in places that are now underwater. The sites we have found on land, the caves, the rock shelters, the open-air camps, may represent only a fraction of the total archaeological record. The rest, perhaps the majority, may lie beneath the waves, beyond the reach of conventional archaeology. This is sometimes referred to as the missing archaeological record, the vast body of evidence for ancient human activity that was lost when the seas rose at the end of the Ice Age. Some archaeologists have argued that this missing record may be enormous, potentially dwarfing the record we have found on land. If this is true, then our picture of the ancient past is fundamentally incomplete. We are seeing only the tip of the iceberg, a metaphor that is particularly apt, given that it was the melting of actual icebergs that created the situation in the first place. The Yonaguni Monument, whether natural or artificial, exists within this context. It is a feature of the submerged landscape, the drowned coastal zone that was once dry land during the Ice Age. If it was built by human hands, it would be exactly the kind of evidence that we would expect to find in this submerged zone, evidence of ancient human activity that was lost when the seas rose and has been waiting silently on the ocean floor for thousands of years to be rediscovered. The process by which sea levels rose at the end of the last Ice Age was not gradual and steady. It was punctuated by episodes of rapid, dramatic rise, events known as meltwater pulses, during which sea levels jumped by several meters in the space of a few centuries or even a few decades. These meltwater pulses were caused by the sudden collapse of large sections of the ice sheets, which released enormous volumes of meltwater into the oceans in a very short period of time. The most dramatic of these events was Meltwater Pulse 1A, which occurred roughly 14,600 years ago. During this event, sea levels rose by approximately 20 meters, nearly 65 feet, in a period of roughly 300 to 500 years. That is a rate of rise of roughly 4 to 7 centimeters per year, or about 1.5 to 2.5 inches per year. While that may not sound dramatic in human terms, its cumulative effect over centuries was devastating. Coastlines retreated by tens of kilometers. Low-lying coastal plains were submerged. Islands that had been connected to the mainland by dry land were cut off by rising waters. For any coastal communities that existed at the time, Meltwater Pulse 1A would have been a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Imagine living in a village on a coastal plain, watching the sea advance year after year, decade after decade, swallowing fields, flooding homes, covering familiar landmarks, forcing generation after generation to retreat to higher ground. Imagine the social disruption, the displacement, the loss of territory, resources, and cultural heritage. Imagine the trauma of watching your world slowly disappear beneath the waves. And now imagine that your village was not just a collection of huts and gardens, but a monumental site, a temple, a pyramid, a ceremonial center built by your ancestors over generations, a place of deep spiritual and cultural significance. Imagine watching that monument gradually sink beneath the rising sea, knowing that there was nothing you could do to save it, knowing that the work of your ancestors was being claimed by the ocean. This is the scenario that proponents of the artificial origin hypothesis envision for the Yonaguni Monument. They see it as a monument that was built during the Ice Age, when the site was on dry land, by a people who were part of a coastal civilization that flourished in the Ryukyu region during the late Pleistocene. And they see it as a monument that was lost, drowned by the rising seas of the post-glacial period, forgotten by history, and only recently rediscovered by chance. It is a compelling narrative, it is a dramatic narrative, and it is a narrative that resonates with deep human themes: the impermanence of civilization, the power of nature, the fragility of human achievement in the face of geological forces, the possibility that great things have been lost and forgotten, waiting to be found. But compelling narratives are not evidence. And the question of whether the Yonaguni Monument is a lost monument of a drowned civilization or a natural formation that happens to look like one remains, frustratingly, unresolved. One of the most interesting approaches to the Yonaguni debate has come from researchers who have tried to move beyond the simple binary of natural versus artificial and explore the possibility that the monument is something in between, a natural formation that was enhanced or modified by human activity without being entirely built from scratch. This idea that ancient peoples sometimes modified natural formations rather than building structures from raw materials is not as unusual as it might sound. Throughout human history, cultures around the world have used natural rock formations as the basis for architectural and artistic creations. The temples of Petra in Jordan were carved into the faces of natural sandstone cliffs. The rock-cut churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia were hewn from solid bedrock. The cave temples of Ajanta and Ellora in India were excavated from natural rock formations. In each of these cases, the builders took advantage of the natural properties of the rock, its shape, its layering, its structural integrity, and added their own modifications, transforming a natural feature into a cultural one. If the Yonaguni Monument was modified in this way, it would explain the mix of natural and artificial features that observers have noted at the site. The underlying terrace structure could be natural, the product of differential erosion acting on layered sandstone, just as Schoch argued. But the right angles could have been sharpened by human hands, the channels could have been deepened and straightened, the flat surfaces could have been leveled and smoothed, the face could have been carved into a natural rock surface, the post holes could have been drilled, the turtle could have been shaped from a natural boulder. This hybrid hypothesis, natural base, human modification, has the advantage of accommodating both the geological evidence and the archaeological evidence. It does not require the implausible claim that ancient peoples built a massive stone structure from scratch on the ocean floor. But it also does not require the equally uncomfortable claim that every single feature of the monument is the product of natural processes, a claim that, for many observers, strains credulity when confronted with the sheer number and regularity of the monument's apparently artificial features. Kimura himself came to favor a version of this hybrid hypothesis. In his later work, he explicitly stated that the monument was a natural rock formation that had been extensively modified by human hands. He used the Japanese term kaihatsu, which roughly translates as development or improvement, to describe what he believed the ancient builders had done to the site. They had taken what nature gave them and made it better, more regular, more symmetrical, more impressive, more useful for whatever purposes they had in mind. This interpretation is elegant and plausible, but it is also extremely difficult to prove or disprove, because it blurs the line between natural and artificial in ways that make definitive evidence hard to come by. If the monument was only modified rather than built entirely from scratch, then the modifications might be subtle enough to be difficult to distinguish from natural erosion, especially after thousands of years of submersion. The tool marks that might have been left by ancient stone workers could have been worn away by currents. The dressed surfaces could have been roughened by marine organisms. The sharpened edges could have been softened by the slow, patient action of the sea. There is another dimension to the Yonaguni story that has received less attention than the geological and archaeological debates, but is no less important. That is the oral tradition and folklore of the Ryukyu Islands. The Ryukyu Islands have a rich tradition of mythology and legend, much of it relating to the sea. The island's original inhabitants, the people who lived there before the Ryukyu kingdom emerged as a unified political entity in the 15th century, had a complex spiritual worldview that placed great emphasis on the relationship between the human world and the ocean. The sea was not simply a source of food and a medium for travel. It was a spiritual realm, a place of power, a home of gods and spirits and ancestors. Among the legends of the Ryukyu Islands, there are stories of lands that once existed above the water but were swallowed by the sea. These stories speak of palaces and temples that sank beneath the waves, of great stone structures that lie hidden on the ocean floor, of a time when the islands were larger and more extensive than they are today. These legends are remarkably consistent across different islands and different communities within the Ryukyu archipelago, suggesting that they may preserve a genuine folk memory of a time when sea levels were lower and the geography of the region was very different from what it is today. One of the most intriguing of these legends is the story of Nuraikana, a mythical land that lies beyond the sea, a paradise from which the gods and the ancestors came and to which the spirits of the dead return. Nuraikana is described as a place of abundance, beauty, and spiritual power. It is sometimes located to the east, across the ocean, and sometimes located beneath the sea, in the depths of the underwater world. In some versions of the legend, Nuraikana is explicitly described as a land that was once above water, but was submerged by a great flood or a rising sea. The parallels between the Nuraikana legend and the hypothesis that the Yonaguni Monument is a remnant of a drowned civilization are striking. If an ancient culture had indeed built monumental structures on the coast of what is now the Ryukyu archipelago, and if those structures had been gradually submerged by rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age, it is entirely plausible that the descendants of that culture would have preserved the memory of those events in their oral tradition, transmuted over thousands of years of retelling into legends of sunken palaces, drowned kingdoms, and paradises beneath the sea. Of course, oral traditions are not historical documents. They are fluid, mutable, subject to embellishment, reinterpretation, and distortion over the centuries. They cannot be taken as literal accounts of historical events, but they can serve as pointers, as indicators that something significant happened in the deep past, something that was important enough to be remembered in however distorted a form across thousands of years of cultural transmission. The Nuraikana legend and the broader tradition of sunken lands in Ryukyuan folklore does not prove that the Yonaguni Monument is a man-made structure, but it adds a layer of cultural context to the debate, a suggestion that the people of the region have long believed that there are great things hidden beneath the sea, and that the world above the waves was once very different from what it is today. The Yonaguni Monument has also attracted the attention of researchers who approach the ancient past from a perspective that is outside the mainstream of academic archaeology. These researchers, sometimes called alternative historians, sometimes called independent researchers, sometimes dismissed as pseudoscientists, have proposed theories about the monument that go far beyond what conventional archaeology is prepared to accept. The most prominent of these alternative researchers is Graham Hancock, a British journalist and author who has spent decades arguing that a sophisticated, technologically advanced civilization existed during the last ice age. a civilization that was destroyed by the catastrophic climate changes that accompanied the end of the Ice Age and whose remnants now lie submerged beneath the oceans of the world. Hancock has written extensively about the Yonaguni Monument, which he sees as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for his theory of a lost Ice Age civilization. Hancock first visited the Yonaguni Monument in the late 1990s, diving on the site with Kimura and other researchers. He was immediately struck by the monument's features, the terraces, the right angles, the apparent carvings, and he became convinced that it was an artificial structure of great antiquity. In his books, particularly Underworld, The Mysterious Origins of Civilization, published in 2002, Hancock presented the Yonaguni Monument as part of a global pattern of submerged structures that, taken together, pointed to the existence of a worldwide civilization during the Ice Age, a civilization that had been erased from history by the rising seas. Hancock's theory is controversial, to say the least. Mainstream archaeologists have criticized it for being speculative, for relying on selective evidence, and for making claims that far exceed what the data can support. The idea of a global Ice Age civilization is not supported by the archaeological record, critics argue. There is no evidence of cities, writing, metallurgy, or any of the other hallmarks of complex civilization in the archaeological deposits from the late Pleistocene. The idea that such a civilization could have existed and left no trace on land, only beneath the sea, is seen by many scholars as implausible. But Hancock and his supporters counter that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. If the Ice Age civilization was primarily coastal, if its cities and monuments were concentrated along coastlines that are now submerged, then we would not expect to find much evidence on land. The archaeological record of the Ice Age, they argue, is heavily biased toward inland sites because those are the sites that have survived above water. The coastal sites, the sites where the most advanced and most organized communities would have been located, have been drowned, and most of them have never been systematically explored. This argument is not without merit. The bias of the archaeological record toward inland and upland sites is well recognized by mainstream archaeologists, and there is widespread agreement that significant amounts of archaeological evidence have been lost to rising sea levels. The disagreement is about the nature and extent of what has been lost. Mainstream archaeologists generally believe that what lies beneath the sea is more of the same, more camps, more middens, more simple structures, more evidence of the same kinds of hunter-gatherer societies that we find on land. Hancock and his supporters believe that what lies beneath the sea is something fundamentally different, evidence of a more advanced, more organized, more sophisticated society than anything the conventional record suggests. The Yonaguni Monument sits at the center of this disagreement. For mainstream archaeologists and geologists, it is either a natural formation or, at most, a natural formation with minor human modifications, interesting, certainly, but not evidence of a lost civilization. For Hancock and his supporters, it is a smoking gun proof that sophisticated monument-building cultures existed in the Western Pacific during the Ice Age, thousands of years before the conventional timeline allows. The debate about the Yonaguni Monument is not just about geology and archaeology. It is also about epistemology, about how we know what we know, about what counts as evidence, and about the standards of proof that should be applied when evaluating extraordinary claims. In science, the burden of proof rests on the person making the claim. If someone claims that a particular formation is artificial, that it was built or modified by human hands, then it is up to that person to provide evidence that supports their claim. The default assumption, in the absence of clear evidence to the contrary, is that a natural-looking formation is natural. This is a reasonable and well-established principle. It prevents the scientific literature from being flooded with unfounded claims about ancient civilizations every time someone finds a rock that looks vaguely like a wall. But this principle can also be a double-edged sword. If the default assumption is always natural, then genuinely artificial structures might be dismissed as natural formations, especially if they are old enough to have been significantly eroded and degraded by natural processes. The older a structure is, the more it would have been affected by erosion, biological incrustation, tectonic activity, and other processes that would tend to make it look more natural and less artificial over time. A structure that was sharp and precise when it was built 10,000 years ago would, after 10,000 years of submersion in the ocean, be rounded, roughened, covered with marine growth, and significantly degraded. It might look very much like a natural formation, even though it was not. This is the dilemma that confronts anyone trying to evaluate the Yonaguni Monument. If it is artificial, it is old enough that its artificial features would have been significantly degraded by natural processes. The sharp right angles that were carved by human hands would have been softened by erosion. The smooth surfaces that were dressed by stone workers would have been roughened by marine organisms. The carvings that once depicted recognizable forms would have been worn and obscured. In short, even if the monument was clearly artificial when it was built, 10,000 years of submersion would have made it look ambiguously natural, which is exactly what we see. Conversely, if the monument is natural, it is remarkable enough that its natural features would be difficult to explain without invoking unusual geological conditions. The concentration of right angles, the regularity of the terraces, the apparent presence of carved features and drilled holes, all of these would require explanation within a natural framework, and some of those explanations, while plausible, are not entirely satisfying. The result is an impasse, the evidence is ambiguous, the interpretations are divergent, the debate continues. One of the most fascinating and often overlooked aspects of the Yonaguni Monument is what lies on the ocean floor around it, the broader underwater landscape in which the monument is situated. Divers who have explored the area around the main monument have reported finding a variety of additional features that are difficult to explain within a purely natural framework. These include what appear to be roads or pathways, flat, level surfaces that extend away from the monument in straight lines, as though they were connecting it to other structures or locations. There are what appear to be retaining walls, long, straight, vertical features that run along the edges of flat platforms, as though they were designed to prevent erosion or to define the boundaries of a space. There are what appear to be drainage channels, narrow grooves that run downhill from flat surfaces, as though they were designed to carry water away from a structure, and there are stones that appear to have been moved. Around the monument, divers have found large stones sitting on flat surfaces in positions that seem inconsistent with natural placement. Some of these stones appear to have been shaped or dressed, their surfaces smoothed, their edges straightened. Some appear to have been placed in deliberate arrangements, pairs, rows, circles. Whether these stones are genuinely artificial or simply natural boulders that have been reinterpreted through the lens of expectation is, like everything else at Yonaguni, a matter of debate. But the sheer density of unusual features in this one area of the seafloor is striking. If each feature taken individually has a 50-50 chance of being natural or artificial, the probability that all of them are natural, that every single apparently artificial feature in this area is merely a coincidence of geology, becomes vanishingly small. This is a statistical argument, not a geological one, and it has limitations. But it captures the intuitive sense that many observers have when they encounter the Yonaguni Monument. There are simply too many coincidences here for all of them to be coincidences. The question of tool marks is one of the most critical and most contentious issues in the Yonaguni debate. If the monument was carved or modified by human hands, then there should be evidence of tool use on its surfaces. Scratches, grooves, chisel marks, or other traces of the stone-working techniques that were used to shape the rock. Conversely, if the monument is entirely natural, its surfaces should show only the marks of natural erosion, the rounded, undulating, random patterns that are characteristic of water, wind, and biological activity. Kimura claimed to have found tool marks on certain surfaces of the monument. He pointed to grooves and scratches that he argued were inconsistent with natural erosion and consistent with the use of stone or metal tools. He noted that some surfaces appeared to have been deliberately smoothed, with a finish that was too even and too regular to be the product of natural processes. Critics challenged these claims, arguing that what Kimura interpreted as tool marks could be explained by natural processes, biological boring by marine organisms, scratching by debris carried by currents, or the natural fracturing of stone along internal planes. The distinction between tool marks and natural marks on stone that has been submerged for thousands of years is extremely difficult to make with confidence, because marine environments subject stone to a wide range of physical, chemical, and biological processes that can mimic or obscure the marks left by human tools. This is one of the great frustrations of the Yonaguni debate. The evidence that would be most decisive, clear, unambiguous tool marks that could not be attributed to any natural process, is precisely the kind of evidence that is most likely to have been destroyed or obscured by thousands of years of submersion in the ocean. If the monument was carved by human hands 10,000 years ago, the tool marks left by those hands would have been subjected to 10,000 years of erosion, biological activity, and chemical dissolution. It would be remarkable if they had survived in a clear, unambiguous form. Their absence, therefore, proves nothing, neither that the monument was carved nor that it was not. Among the most compelling features identified by proponents of the artificial origin hypothesis is what has been called the Twin Megaliths. Near the base of the main monument, two large stones stand side by side, rising vertically from the seafloor. These stones are roughly similar in size and shape, and they are oriented in the same direction, facing the same way, standing at the same angle. They look, to many observers, like a pair of standing stones, like the megalithic pillars found at sites such as Stonehenge, Karnak, or Göbekli Tepe. The twin megaliths are significant because standing stones are, by their very nature, difficult to explain as natural formations. In the natural world, large stones tend to lie flat or to lean at random angles. They do not tend to stand upright in parallel pairs, oriented in the same direction. The fact that the Yonaguni twin megaliths appear to do exactly this has been cited as one of the strongest pieces of evidence for human involvement at the site. But once again, the counter-argument is that natural processes can, under the right conditions, produce upright stone features. Rocks that fracture along vertical planes can remain standing upright after the surrounding material has been eroded away. And the fact that two such rocks happen to stand side by side in similar orientations, while unusual, is not impossible. It could be the result of the same fracture pattern affecting a single block of stone, splitting it into two parallel slabs that remained upright as the surrounding rock eroded. The twin megaliths, like so many features of the Yonaguni Monument, exist in the gray zone between natural and artificial. They are suggestive but not conclusive. They are intriguing but not definitive. They invite interpretation but resist confirmation. Another aspect of the Yonaguni Monument that warrants careful examination is the underwater cave system that exists in the vicinity of the main formation. Several caves have been found in the waters near the monument, and some of them contain features that have added fuel to the debate. One cave in particular has attracted attention because of what appear to be markings on its walls. These markings, some researchers have argued, resemble petroglyphs, simple carvings or engravings of the kind found in caves and on rock surfaces throughout the ancient world. If genuine, these markings would constitute some of the most direct evidence of human activity at the Yonaguni site, because petroglyphs are unambiguously artificial. They are created by human hands, using tools, with the intention of producing a visible mark on a surface. However, the identification of these markings as petroglyphs has been challenged. Critics have argued that what some observers interpret as petroglyphs could be natural features, grooves carved by marine organisms, marks left by the natural fracturing of rock, or patterns produced by the differential dissolution of minerals within the stone. Underwater caves are subject to a wide range of geological and biological processes that can produce marks and patterns on cave walls, and distinguishing between natural marks and artificial carvings in this environment is extremely difficult. Kimura examined the cave markings and concluded that at least some of them were artificial. He noted that certain marks appeared to depict recognizable symbols, crosses, circles, lines, that were similar to symbols found in ancient cultures around the world. He also noted that the marks appeared to be concentrated in specific areas of the cave wall, rather than being randomly distributed, which he argued was consistent with deliberate placement rather than natural processes. But without clear, high-resolution imaging and detailed analysis of the marks' physical characteristics, their depth, their cross-section, their surface texture, it remains impossible to determine with certainty whether they are the work of human hands or the products of natural processes. The cave markings, like so much else at Yonaguni, remain tantalizingly ambiguous. One line of evidence that could potentially resolve the Yonaguni debate is dating. If it were possible to determine precisely when the monument acquired its present form, when its terraces were shaped, when its channels were cut, when its surfaces were modified, then it might be possible to determine whether those events occurred at a time when the site was above water and accessible to human activity, or at a time when it was already submerged and therefore beyond the reach of human hands. Unfortunately, dating the Yonaguni Monument is extraordinarily difficult. The monument is made of stone specifically, sandstone and mudstone that was formed millions of years ago. Standard geological dating methods can tell us when the rock itself was formed, but they cannot tell us when the rock was shaped into its present configuration. The rock is ancient. The shaping, whether natural or artificial, is much more recent, and there is no easy way to determine when the shaping occurred. Several dating methods have been attempted or proposed for the monument. Radiocarbon dating, the standard method for dating organic materials up to about 50,000 years old, is not directly applicable to stone. However, if organic materials such as shells, coral, or plant remains could be found trapped in cracks or crevices in the monument, they could potentially be radiocarbon dated, providing a minimum age for the features in which they are found. Some such materials have been found, but their relationship to the formation of the monument's features is unclear. A shell found in a crack in the rock could have washed in at any time after the crack formed. It does not necessarily date the formation of the crack itself. Optically stimulated luminescence dating, a method that measures the time since a mineral grain was last exposed to sunlight, has been proposed as a potential method for dating the monument's surfaces. If a surface was carved or exposed by human activity, the mineral grains on that surface would have been exposed to sunlight at the time of carving. Optically stimulated luminescence dating could, in principle, determine when that exposure occurred. However, this method has not yet been successfully applied to the Yonaguni Monument, in part because of the technical difficulties of collecting samples from submerged stone surfaces without exposing them to light during the collection process. Cosmogenic nuclide dating, a method that measures the accumulation of certain isotopes produced by cosmic ray bombardment on exposed rock surfaces, has also been proposed. This method could potentially determine how long a given surface has been exposed to cosmic rays, which would provide information about when that surface was created, whether by natural erosion or by human carving. However, this method requires surfaces that have been exposed to the atmosphere, not submerged underwater, and its applicability to the Yonaguni site is limited. The dating problem remains one of the most significant obstacles to resolving the Yonaguni debate. Without a reliable date for the monument's features, it is impossible to determine with certainty whether those features were created before or after the site was submerged, and therefore whether they could have been created by human hands. The cultural and spiritual dimensions of the Yonaguni Monument should not be overlooked. For the people of Yonaguni Island and the broader Ryukyu archipelago, the monument is not simply a scientific curiosity or a tourist attraction. It is a part of their heritage, a connection to the deep past of their homeland, a physical embodiment of the legends and traditions that have been passed down through generations. Yonaguni Island itself has a rich cultural history. The island's traditional culture is distinct from that of mainland Japan, reflecting the broader Ryukyuan cultural tradition that developed independently on the islands of the archipelago over thousands of years. The Ryukyuan peoples had their own languages, their own religious practices, their own social structures, and their own artistic traditions, many of which were quite different from those of the Japanese mainland. The Ryukyuan kingdom, which was centered on the main island of Okinawa, was an independent political entity until it was annexed by Japan in the late 19th century. And while Ryukyuan culture has been significantly influenced by Japanese culture in the modern era, many elements of the older, indigenous traditions survive. Among the most important aspects of traditional Ryukyuan culture is the role of the Naro, female spiritual leaders who served as intermediaries between the human world and the spirit world. The Naro conducted rituals, offered prayers, and performed ceremonies at sacred sites throughout the islands. Many of these sacred sites were natural features of the landscape: caves, springs, groves of trees, prominent rocks that were believed to be inhabited by or connected to the spirits of ancestors, nature deities, and other supernatural beings. The concept of utaki, sacred spaces or groves, is central to Ryukyuan spirituality. Utaki are places where the boundary between the human world and the spirit world is believed to be thin, where communication with the divine is possible. They are often associated with natural features of great beauty or power: a towering cliff, a deep cave, a spring of clear water. The idea that natural features of the landscape could be sacred, could be places of spiritual power, is deeply embedded in Ryukyuan culture. This cultural context is relevant to the Yonaguni debate because it suggests a worldview in which natural formations and human constructions are not sharply distinguished. In Ryukyuan tradition, a natural rock formation could be just as sacred, just as culturally significant as a man-made temple. A cave that was formed by natural processes could be just as important a place of worship as a shrine built by human hands. The boundary between the natural and the artificial, which seems so important to Western scientists debating whether the Yonaguni Monument is real or not real, may not have been so important to the people who lived in this region thousands of years ago. If the Yonaguni Monument was indeed modified by human hands, the modifications may not have been architectural in the Western sense. They may have been ritual in nature, minor alterations to a natural formation that was already considered sacred, designed to enhance its spiritual power or to mark it as a place of particular significance. The carving of a face, the drilling of holes for the placement of ritual objects, the smoothing of a surface to create a platform for ceremonies. These are the kinds of modifications that might leave subtle traces on the stone, traces that would be difficult to distinguish from natural processes after thousands of years of erosion. This possibility that the Yonaguni Monument is a natural sacred site that was minimally modified for ritual purposes represents perhaps the most nuanced and most plausible interpretation of the available evidence. It accounts for the monument's predominantly natural appearance, while also accounting for the features that seem to defy purely natural explanation. And it is consistent with what we know about the spiritual practices of ancient peoples in the Ryukyu region and elsewhere. The question of what the Yonaguni Monument might have been used for, if it was indeed used by human beings, is another area of speculation that has generated considerable discussion. If the monument was a man-made or human-modified structure, what was its purpose? Was it a temple, a citadel, a port, a monument, a tomb, a market, a gathering place, a calendar? Several theories have been proposed. Kimura suggested that the monument might have been a castle or a fortress, a defensive structure designed to protect a settlement from attack. He pointed to the monument's commanding position, its steep sides, and its elevated platforms, which would have provided excellent vantage points for observation and defense. He also noted what he interpreted as defensive features, walls, ditches, and barriers that could have been used to control access to the structure. Others have suggested that the monument was a ceremonial or religious site, a temple complex designed for the worship of gods, the performance of rituals, and the conduct of ceremonies. The flat platforms could have served as stages for ritual performances. The terraces could have accommodated spectators. The carved features, the face, the turtle, could have been objects of worship or symbols of religious significance. Still others have proposed that the monument had an astronomical function, that it was designed to track the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars for agricultural, navigational, or ceremonial purposes. The monument's alignment to the cardinal directions has been cited as evidence for this theory, as have certain features that some researchers have interpreted as sighting lines or observation platforms. And some have suggested that the monument was a utilitarian structure, a port or a dock, designed to facilitate maritime trade and transportation. The terraces could have served as piers or quays, providing level surfaces for the loading and unloading of boats. The channels could have served as water conduits, directing the flow of tides and currents to create calm anchorages. The flat platforms could have served as storage areas or market spaces. None of these theories can be confirmed or refuted on the basis of the currently available evidence. Without artifacts, without pottery, tools, inscriptions, or other objects that could illuminate the function and cultural context of the site, any theory about the monument's purpose remains speculative. The international attention that the Yonaguni Monument has received has had significant consequences for the island itself. Since the monument's discovery became widely known in the 1990s, Yonaguni has become a destination for divers from around the world who want to see the formation for themselves. Diving tourism has become an important part of the island's economy, bringing visitors, revenue, and employment to a community that had traditionally relied on fishing and agriculture. The monument has also become a source of local pride. For the people of Yonaguni, the monument is not just a geological or archaeological curiosity. It is a symbol of their island's uniqueness, a source of identity and distinction in a world where small, remote islands are often overlooked and forgotten. The monument has put Yonaguni on the map, literally and figuratively, and has given the island's residents a sense that their home is a place of global significance. Local efforts to protect and promote the monument have included proposals to have it designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These proposals have faced challenges, in part because of the ongoing debate about whether the monument is natural or artificial. UNESCO requires that nominated sites have outstanding universal value, and the criteria for that designation are more easily met if a site is recognized as a cultural heritage site, a product of human activity, rather than a natural heritage site. The ambiguity surrounding the monument's origin has complicated the nomination process. There have also been concerns about the impact of diving tourism on the monument itself. The constant presence of divers at the site, touching surfaces, stirring up sediment, introducing pollutants, could potentially accelerate the erosion and degradation of the formation's features. Efforts to balance the economic benefits of tourism with the need to preserve the monument for future generations and future research are ongoing. As we approach the midpoint of our exploration of the Yonaguni Monument, it is worth pausing to take stock of where the debate stands. On one side, there are those who believe that the monument is a natural geological formation, a product of differential erosion, natural jointing, and the slow, patient action of water on layered sedimentary rock. This position is supported by the known geological properties of the rock from which the monument is formed, by the absence of unambiguous artifacts at the site, and by the principle that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. On the other side, there are those who believe that the monument is, at least in part, a human creation, a natural formation that was carved, shaped, and modified by human hands at a time when the site was above water, thousands of years ago. This position is supported by the remarkable regularity and geometrical precision of the monument's features, by the presence of features that are difficult to explain within a purely natural framework, and by the broader cultural and geological context of the Ryukyu archipelago. Between these two positions, there is a vast middle ground, a zone of uncertainty, ambiguity, and unresolved questions. The Yonaguni Monument is not a clear-cut case. It is not a formation that is obviously natural, like a canyon or a sea stack, nor is it a formation that is obviously artificial, like a pyramid or a wall. It is something in between, a formation that looks natural in some respects and artificial in others, that defies easy categorization, and that challenges observers to question their assumptions about what nature can and cannot create. This ambiguity is, in many ways, the most important thing about the Yonaguni Monument. It forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge about both geology and archaeology. It reminds us that the natural world is capable of producing formations that look artificial, and that the ancient world may have been capable of producing structures that we have difficulty distinguishing from natural formations. It challenges us to be both open-minded and rigorous, to consider all possibilities while demanding evidence for extraordinary claims. The waters surrounding the Yonaguni Monument are home to a remarkable ecosystem that adds another layer of complexity to the site's story. The monument sits within a zone of strong ocean currents. The Kuroshio Current, one of the world's major ocean currents, flows through this region, bringing warm tropical water northward from the equatorial Pacific. These currents support a rich and diverse marine community, including hard and soft corals, sponges, sea fans, and a wide variety of fish species. The marine life that inhabits the monument has, over the millennia, colonized its surfaces extensively. Corals, algae, and other organisms have attached themselves to the stone, covering its surfaces with layers of biological growth that can obscure the underlying features. Boring organisms, sponges, worms, and mollusks that drill into stone have penetrated the monument's surfaces, creating holes and channels that can be difficult to distinguish from man-made features. Marine erosion, the mechanical and chemical breakdown of stone by seawater and marine organisms, has altered the monument's surfaces in ways that make it harder to determine their original form. This biological activity has both obscured and, in some cases, paradoxically highlighted the monument's features. The growth of corals and other organisms on the monument's surfaces has tended to soften and blur its edges, making sharp angles look rounder and straight lines look more irregular. But in some cases, the differential growth of organisms on different surfaces, with some surfaces supporting more growth than others, has actually emphasized the monument's geometry, making its terraces, platforms, and steps more visible than they might otherwise be. For researchers trying to determine whether the monument's features are natural or artificial, the biological activity on its surfaces is both a challenge and a source of information. The species of organisms that colonize a surface and the rate at which they grow depend on the orientation, texture, and composition of that surface. Studying the patterns of biological growth on the monument can, in principle, provide information about the characteristics of the underlying stone surface, whether it was smooth or rough, flat or curved, recently exposed or long-standing. This kind of analysis has been attempted by some researchers, but the results have been inconclusive. The broader Pacific context of the Yonaguni Monument is also important to consider. The Pacific Ocean is the largest body of water on Earth, covering an area greater than all the continents combined. It is home to thousands of islands, ranging from tiny atolls to massive volcanic archipelagos, and it has been a theater of human activity for tens of thousands of years. The peoples of the Pacific, the Melanesians, the Micronesians, the Polynesians, and the many other groups that have inhabited the ocean's islands, are among the most accomplished maritime cultures in human history. They crossed vast stretches of open ocean in canoes, navigating by the stars, the currents, the patterns of waves, and the flight paths of birds. They settled islands that were separated by thousands of kilometers of open water. They developed sophisticated navigation techniques, complex social structures, and rich cultural traditions that were adapted to life on the sea. Some of these Pacific cultures were also builders of monumental stone structures. The moai of Easter Island, the massive stone heads that have become one of the most iconic images of the ancient world, were carved from volcanic rock by the Rapa Nui people and transported to ceremonial platforms around the island's coast. The Nan Madol of Pohnpei, a complex of artificial islands and megalithic stone structures in the Caroline Islands of Micronesia, is one of the most impressive feats of ancient engineering in the Pacific, with massive basalt columns stacked to create walls, platforms, and enclosures. The heiau of Hawaii stone platforms used as temples and ceremonial sites demonstrate the widespread practice of stone construction among Pacific Island cultures. These examples demonstrate that the peoples of the Pacific were capable of monumental stone construction, using techniques that ranged from simple stacking to sophisticated carving and shaping. They also demonstrate that maritime cultures whose lives were centered on the sea, could develop the kind of social organization, technical skill, and cultural motivation needed to build large, permanent structures of stone. If the Yonaguni Monument is a man-made or human-modified structure, it would fit within this broader Pacific tradition of maritime megalithic construction. It would be one of the earliest examples of this tradition, perhaps the earliest, but it would not be anomalous. It would be the beginning of a story that continued for thousands of years, across thousands of kilometers of ocean, culminating in the great stone structures of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. This Pacific context is important because it suggests that the cultural capacity for monumental stone construction existed in the region. The peoples of the Pacific did build in stone, they did create monumental structures, they did develop the skills and the social organization needed to move, shape, and arrange large pieces of rock. If these capabilities existed in later periods, it is not unreasonable to ask whether they might also have existed in earlier periods, whether the ancestors of the great Pacific maritime cultures might have begun their tradition of stone construction thousands of years before the examples we currently know about. One of the most thought-provoking aspects of the Yonaguni debate is what it reveals about the nature of scientific inquiry itself. Science is often presented as a process of objective, dispassionate investigation, a method for discovering truth through the systematic collection and analysis of evidence, free from bias, prejudice, or preconception. And in principle, that is what science aspires to be. But in practice, science is conducted by human beings, and human beings are not objective or dispassionate. They have beliefs, expectations, assumptions, and biases that influence how they interpret evidence, what questions they ask, and what conclusions they draw. The Yonaguni debate is a case study in the role of expectations and assumptions in scientific interpretation. When a geologist looks at the Yonaguni Monument, they see a rock formation. They see sandstone and mudstone, layered and jointed, eroded by water and biological activity. They see natural processes operating on natural materials to produce natural features. Their training, their experience, and their professional worldview lead them to interpret the monument within a geological framework, and within that framework its features are explicable, unusual, perhaps, but not inexplicable. When an archaeologist or an alternative researcher looks at the same monument, they see something different. They see terraces and steps, platforms and pathways, carvings and channels. They see design, intention, purpose. Their training, their experience, and their intellectual worldview lead them to interpret the monument within a cultural framework, and within that framework its features are evidence of human activity, evidence that demands explanation and investigation. Neither perspective is inherently more valid than the other. Both are informed by legitimate knowledge and legitimate modes of inquiry. But they lead to very different conclusions about the same body of evidence. And this divergence highlights a fundamental challenge in any interdisciplinary investigation. The same evidence can look very different depending on the lens through which it is viewed. The resolution of the Yonaguni debate, if it comes, will likely require a truly interdisciplinary approach, an approach that brings together geologists, archaeologists, marine biologists, oceanographers, cultural anthropologists, and other specialists in a coordinated effort to study the monument from every possible angle. It will require new technologies, more sophisticated imaging, more precise dating methods, more advanced analytical techniques to extract information from the monument that current methods cannot provide. And it will require an openness to the possibility that the answer may not be a simple binary, not natural or artificial, but something more complex, more nuanced, and more interesting than either of those simple labels can capture. The story of the Yonaguni Monument is, at its heart, a story about the human relationship with the past. It is about our desire to understand where we came from, what our ancestors were capable of, and what might have been lost in the vast expanses of time that separate us from the deep past. It is about our fascination with the unknown, our love of mystery, our willingness to entertain possibilities that go beyond the safe and the well-established. And it is about our obligation as seekers of truth to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to conclusions that are uncomfortable, controversial, or revolutionary. The Yonaguni Monument may be a natural formation. It may be the most remarkably regular and geometrically precise natural formation on the planet, but a natural formation nonetheless, a product of millions of years of geological processes, unmodified by human hands, owing its striking appearance to the particular properties of the rock from which it is formed and the particular conditions under which it has been eroded. Or the Yonaguni Monument may be something else entirely. It may be the remains of a structure built or shaped by human beings thousands of years ago, a monument of a civilization that we have forgotten, a culture that we have yet to understand, a chapter of human history that has been hidden beneath the waves for millennia. It may be evidence that the human story is longer, richer, and more complex than we currently imagine, that the roots of civilization reach deeper into the past than we have been willing to believe. The truth is that we do not yet know. The evidence is ambiguous, the debate is unresolved. The monument sits on the ocean floor off the coast of Yonaguni Island as it has sat for thousands of years, patient and silent, waiting for someone to finally decipher its secrets. In the second part of this exploration, we will dive deeper into the specific features of the monument, examining them in forensic detail. We will explore the latest research findings and the newest theories that have emerged in recent years. We will investigate the broader network of underwater structures found throughout the Ryukyu archipelago and beyond. We will examine the geological evidence with fresh eyes, considering new data about the formation processes that could or could not have created what we see on the seafloor. We will hear from the researchers who have dedicated their careers to studying this site, and from the divers who have spent countless hours exploring its terraces, its pathways, and its mysteries. We will explore the connections between the Yonaguni Monument and other ancient sites around the world, sites that suggest the possibility of a global pattern of submerged structures, a worldwide network of evidence for civilizations that the sea has claimed. And we will confront the deepest and most important question of all. What would it mean for our understanding of human history if the Yonaguni Monument is, in fact, what it appears to be? The ocean keeps its secrets well. But it does not keep them forever, and the Yonaguni Monument, whether nature's masterpiece or humanity's forgotten triumph, has one more thing in common with the sea that surrounds it. The truth about it runs deeper than the surface, and to find it, we must be willing to dive. The monument waits, the questions remain, and the search for answers is far from over. Beneath the turquoise waters of the East China Sea, where the warm currents of the Kuroshio sweep past the rugged cliffs of Japan's most remote inhabited island, the Yonaguni Monument continues its silent vigil on the ocean floor. It has been there for thousands of years, longer than any written record, longer than any living memory, longer than any civilization that exists today. It was there before the Ryukyu kingdom was founded. It was there before the first Chinese dynasties rose and fell. It was there before the pyramids of Egypt were conceived, and it will be there, patient and immovable, long after the debates about its origins have been settled or forgotten. In the first part of our exploration, we examine the broad outlines of the Yonaguni story, the discovery, the initial reactions, the competing interpretations, the geological and archaeological context, the cultural significance of the site and the region. We introduced the key figures in the debate, explored the arguments on both sides, and confronted the frustrating ambiguity of the evidence. Now, in this second part, we go deeper. We descend to the ocean floor itself, to the stone surfaces and sharp-edged terraces and mysterious carved forms that have made the Yonaguni Monument one of the most debated sites in the world. We examine the specific features of the monument in forensic detail. We explore the newest research, the latest discoveries, and the emerging theories that may one day resolve the great question that the monument poses. And we confront, squarely and honestly, the profound implications that would follow if the Yonaguni Monument is indeed what many believe it to be, the remains of a civilization lost beneath the rising seas at the end of the last ice age. Let us begin where any serious investigator would begin, with the stone itself. The Yonaguni Monument is composed of a type of rock known as Lower Miocene Yama group sandstone and mudstone. This rock was formed roughly 20 million years ago, during the Miocene epoch, when the sediments that would eventually become the monument were deposited on the floor of an ancient sea. Over millions of years, these sediments were compressed and cemented into solid rock, layers of sandstone alternating with layers of mudstone, each layer representing a different period of deposition, a different chapter in the geological history of the region. This layered structure is crucial to understanding the monument's appearance. Sandstone and mudstone have different physical properties. Sandstone tends to be harder and more resistant to erosion. Mudstone tends to be softer and more easily worn away. When these alternating layers are exposed to the erosive forces of the ocean, waves, currents, chemical dissolution, biological activity, the softer mudstone layers erode more quickly than the harder sandstone layers. The result is a natural terracing effect, in which the harder layers stand out as horizontal shelves or steps while the softer layers recede, creating the appearance of a staircase. This process, known as differential erosion, is well documented in geology. It is responsible for many of the stepped and terraced rock formations found around the world, from the sandstone mesas of the desert to the sea cliffs of the coast. And it is, according to geologists who argue that the Yonaguni Monument is a natural formation, the primary mechanism responsible for the monument's striking terraced appearance. But differential erosion by itself does not fully account for everything we see at Yonaguni. Differential erosion can create terraces, yes, but the terraces it creates tend to be irregular, varying in width, height, and extent, following the natural variations in the thickness and composition of the rock layers. The terraces at Yonaguni, by contrast, are remarkably regular. They are remarkably uniform in their dimensions. They are remarkably consistent in their spacing. And they are remarkably level, far more level in some cases than what would be expected from a purely natural process of differential erosion. This regularity is one of the features that first drew Masaaki Kimura's attention, and that continues to be cited by proponents of the artificial origin hypothesis. If the terraces were created by differential erosion alone, one would expect them to show the same kind of variability that is seen in other naturally terraced rock formations. The fact that they do not, the fact that they are more regular, more symmetrical, and more precisely dimensioned than natural terraces typically are suggests, to those who favor the artificial hypothesis, that something other than natural erosion has been at work. Kimura addressed this point directly in his research. He measured the dimensions of the monument's terraces in detail, comparing them to natural terraced formations in the same geological setting. He found that the Yonaguni terraces were significantly more regular than comparable natural formations in the region. The variation in terrace width at the monument was smaller than the variation in naturally terraced outcrops on Yonaguni Island itself. The variation in terrace height was similarly reduced. The overall geometry of the monument was more consistent, more organized, and more predictable than what natural processes alone would be expected to produce. This finding is not definitive proof of human modification. There could be geological explanations for the unusual regularity of the terraces. Perhaps the rock layers at the monument site are themselves unusually uniform in thickness and composition, leading to unusually uniform terracing when subjected to differential erosion. But it is a data point that is difficult to dismiss, and it shifts the balance of the argument, at least slightly, toward the possibility that human hands have played a role in shaping the monument. Let us turn now to one of the most specific and most debated features of the Yonaguni Monument, the feature known as the Straight Wall or the Stadium. Near the eastern edge of the main formation, there is a long, straight, vertical wall of stone that drops from one terrace level to another. This wall is remarkable for its straightness. It extends for approximately 10 meters without significant deviation, a straight, vertical drop with no curves, no undulations, no irregularities. Its surface is flat and smooth. Its edges, where it meets the horizontal surfaces above and below, are sharp and well-defined, forming angles that are very close to 90 degrees. This feature has been one of the most contentious points in the Yonaguni debate. Proponents of the artificial hypothesis argue that a wall this straight, this smooth, and this precisely vertical could not have been produced by natural erosion. Natural erosion, they point out, is inherently irregular. Water flowing over stone produces rounded, uneven surfaces, not flat, smooth walls. The only way to produce a wall this straight and this smooth, they argue, is to cut it deliberately, to use tools to remove stone from a flat plane, creating a vertical surface of the desired height and orientation. Critics respond that the wall's straightness can be explained by natural jointing. Sandstone and mudstone fracture along flat planes joints that are determined by the internal stresses within the rock. When erosion exploits a joint, the result can be a straight, flat, vertical surface, a natural wall that looks as though it was cut by a stonemason. The straightness of the wall, critics argue, is not evidence of human activity, but evidence of a well-developed joint set in the underlying rock. This counter-argument is geologically sound. Natural joints can indeed produce remarkably straight and flat surfaces. But proponents of the artificial hypothesis have pointed out that the straight wall at Yonaguni is unusually long and unusually consistent for a natural joint surface. While joints can produce straight features, those features typically extend for only a few meters before being interrupted by cross joints, irregularities in the rock, or variations in the joint orientation. A joint surface that extends for 10 meters without interruption, maintaining its straightness, its smoothness, and its vertical orientation throughout, is unusual, though not unprecedented. The straight wall exemplifies the central challenge of the Yonaguni debate. It is a feature that could be natural, and the geological explanation for it is plausible. But it is also a feature that would be entirely consistent with human carving, and its degree of regularity is at the upper end of what natural processes typically produce. Without additional evidence, tool marks, for example, or associated artifacts, the straight wall remains interpretively ambiguous. Adjacent to the straight wall is another feature that has attracted considerable attention, a broad, flat, roughly triangular depression that has been described as a triangular pool or a triangular depression. This feature is a shallow, flat-bottomed cavity cut into the surface of one of the monument's terraces. Its outline is roughly triangular, with 3 relatively straight sides and 3 relatively well-defined corners. Its bottom is flat and level. Its sides are steep and straight. Triangular depressions are not common features in natural geology. While erosion can produce all manner of irregular cavities in rock, the formation of a clearly triangular cavity with straight sides and sharp corners is not easily explained by known erosional processes. Natural erosion tends to produce rounded, irregular shapes. Triangles with their straight lines and sharp angles are geometrical forms that are much more commonly associated with human design than with natural processes. Kimura pointed to the triangular depression as one of the strongest pieces of evidence for human modification of the monument. He argued that its geometric precision, its straight sides, its sharp corners, its flat bottom could not be explained by natural erosion and was consistent with deliberate carving. He suggested that the depression might have had a functional purpose. Perhaps it was a basin for holding water, a container for ritual offerings, or a marker of some kind. Schoch and other skeptics offered alternative explanations. They suggested that the depression might have been formed by the intersection of two or more natural joints, which eroded preferentially to create a cavity with straight sides. The triangular shape, they argued, could be a coincidence of the angles at which the joints intersected. They also suggested that biological erosion, the dissolution of rock by marine organisms, particularly boring sponges, could have contributed to the formation of the cavity. These explanations are possible, but they are somewhat strained. The intersection of joints can produce angular cavities, but a clearly triangular cavity with 3 straight sides and 3 well-defined corners would require the intersection of at least 3 joint sets at precisely the right angles, a coincidence that is possible but not common. And biological erosion tends to produce rounded, irregular cavities rather than geometrically precise ones. The triangular depression, like the straight wall, is a feature that exists in the gray zone between natural and artificial. It is suggestive but not conclusive. It is intriguing but not definitive. And it is precisely the kind of feature that could be explained by either hypothesis, depending on one's prior assumptions and interpretive framework. Perhaps the most emotionally resonant feature of the Yonaguni Monument is the feature known as the face. Located on a large, flat surface near the base of the main structure, the face is a formation of stone that appears to depict a human face, with what look like 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth arranged in the proportions and positions of a human visage. The face is not small, it is several meters across, and while its features are not sharp or finely detailed, they are softened and blurred by millennia of submersion. They are distinct enough to be recognizable in photographs and video footage. The 2 apparent eyes are roughly symmetrical, positioned on either side of a central ridge that resembles a nose. Below the nose, there is a horizontal feature that resembles a mouth. The overall proportions are close to what one would expect in a stylized depiction of a human face. The face has been one of the most polarizing features of the monument. For proponents of the artificial hypothesis, it is a powerful piece of evidence, a deliberate carving that depicts a human face, similar to the carved faces found at ancient sites around the world, from the moai of Easter Island to the great stone heads of the Olmec civilization. They argue that the symmetry of the features, the proportions of the face, and the overall coherence of the image are too precise to be coincidental, too close to a real face to be the product of random erosion. For skeptics, the face is a textbook example of pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive faces and meaningful patterns in random or ambiguous stimuli. Pareidolia is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. It is the reason we see faces in clouds, in the grain of wood, in the patterns of stains on walls. It is a product of the human brain's extraordinary face recognition capability, a capability that is so powerful, so deeply ingrained, that it produces false positives on a regular basis, finding faces where none exist. Schoch, while acknowledging that the face was a striking feature, attributed it to pareidolia. He pointed out that natural erosion can produce formations that resemble faces, especially on flat or rounded surfaces where differential erosion can create features that the eye interprets as eyes, noses, and mouths. He noted that similar faces can be found in natural rock formations around the world, the Old Man of the Mountain in New Hampshire, for example, or the various rock formations in national parks that have been given names like Cathedral Rock or Elephant Rock because of their resemblance to recognizable shapes. The pareidolia argument is strong but not conclusive. It is true that the human brain is wired to see faces, and it is true that natural erosion can produce face-like formations. But it is also true that ancient peoples did carve faces into stone, and that any attempt to distinguish a carved face from a natural face-like formation must grapple with the possibility that what looks like pareidolia might actually be art. Kimura attempted to address this challenge by examining the face in detail. He measured its proportions and compared them to the proportions of human faces and to the proportions of face carvings found at other archaeological sites. He found that the face's proportions were within the range of both natural variability and artistic convention. In other words, the face was proportioned like a face, but that fact alone did not prove it was carved, because natural erosion could, in principle, produce features with similar proportions. What Kimura found more compelling was the symmetry of the face. Natural erosion, he argued, tends to produce asymmetrical features because the erosive forces acting on a surface, currents, waves, biological activity, are rarely perfectly symmetrical. A naturally formed face-like feature would be expected to be somewhat lopsided, with one eye larger or higher than the other, the nose slightly off-center, the mouth uneven. The Yonaguni face, while not perfectly symmetrical, was more symmetrical than what Kimura would have expected from a naturally eroded formation. This additional degree of symmetry, he argued, was evidence of deliberate shaping. The debate about the face continues. It is in many ways a microcosm of the larger Yonaguni debate, a single feature that can be interpreted in two radically different ways, depending on whether one approaches it with the assumptions of a geologist or the assumptions of an archaeologist. Beyond the main monument itself, one of the most significant and least widely discussed aspects of the Yonaguni investigation is the discovery of what appears to be a stone tablet near the monument site. This object, a flat, roughly rectangular piece of stone, was found on the seabed not far from the main formation. Its surface appears to bear marks that some researchers have interpreted as engravings or inscriptions. If these marks are genuine engravings, if they are the product of deliberate human activity, they would constitute arguably the most important single piece of evidence in the entire Yonaguni debate. A stone tablet with inscriptions would be an unambiguous artifact, a man-made object that could not be attributed to natural erosion, differential weathering, or any other geological process. It would prove beyond any reasonable doubt that human beings were present at the site and engaged in cultural activities there. Kimura examined the tablet and concluded that the marks on its surface were artificial. He argued that they formed a coherent pattern, not random scratches or natural grooves, but deliberate markings arranged in a recognizable configuration. He compared the marks to symbols found in early writing systems and to petroglyphic traditions from around the Pacific Rim. Critics, predictably, were not convinced. They argued that the marks could be natural, the result of biological boring, chemical dissolution, or mechanical scratching by debris carried by currents. They pointed out that the sea floor is littered with stones that bear natural marks, and that the human tendency to see patterns in random marks, a phenomenon closely related to pareidolia, could easily lead an observer to interpret natural marks as deliberate engravings. The stone tablet has not been subjected to the kind of rigorous, independent analysis that would be needed to settle the question. It has not been examined by multiple independent teams using advanced imaging and analytical techniques. Its marks have not been compared systematically to databases of natural marks and artificial marks to determine which category they most closely resemble. Until such analysis is conducted, the stone tablet remains another piece of tantalizing but inconclusive evidence, another frustrating addition to the pile of ambiguity that surrounds the Yonaguni Monument. One of the approaches that has been used to investigate the Yonaguni Monument in more recent years is underwater photogrammetry, a technique that uses overlapping photographs taken from multiple angles to create detailed three-dimensional models of underwater structures. Photogrammetry has been used extensively in terrestrial archaeology to document and analyze archaeological sites, and its application to underwater sites like the Yonaguni Monument has opened new possibilities for investigation. Three-dimensional models of the monument, created from photogrammetric data, allow researchers to examine its features with a precision and a level of detail that is not possible from individual photographs or video footage. The models can be rotated, measured, analyzed, and compared to models of known natural and artificial structures. They can reveal subtle features, slight variations in surface texture, small-scale geometric regularities, faint marks or patterns that might not be visible in conventional imagery. Several teams have created photogrammetric models of the Yonaguni Monument, and the results have been illuminating. The models confirm the remarkable regularity of the monument's terraces and the sharpness of its edges. They reveal the full extent of the formation's geometric complexity, showing features that are not easily visible in conventional photographs because of the limited visibility and the difficulty of obtaining a comprehensive view of the structure while diving. The photogrammetric models have also revealed something that had not been fully appreciated before. The overall shape of the monument, viewed from above, is not simply a random mass of terraced stone. It has a definite outline, a roughly rectangular shape with well-defined corners and straight edges. This rectangular outline is consistent with the hypothesis that the monument is an artificial structure, because rectangular shapes with straight edges and well-defined corners are characteristic of human construction. Natural formations, by contrast, tend to have irregular, curved outlines that reflect the random nature of erosional processes. However, proponents of the natural origin hypothesis have pointed out that the rectangular outline of the monument could be explained by the same jointing process that accounts for its other angular features. If the rock is jointed along two sets of fractures oriented at right angles to each other, which is a common configuration in horizontally layered sedimentary rocks, then erosion along these joints would produce a rectangular outline, regardless of whether any human modification had taken place. The photogrammetric data, while valuable, has not resolved the debate, but it has provided a much more detailed and accurate picture of the monument's geometry, and it has created a foundation for future analysis. As photogrammetric techniques continue to improve and as new analytical methods are developed, the three-dimensional models of the monument may yield insights that have so far remained hidden. One of the most significant developments in the Yonaguni story in recent years has been the growing recognition that the monument is not an isolated phenomenon. Throughout the Ryukyu archipelago and in other parts of the Western Pacific, divers and researchers have found additional underwater formations that share some of the characteristics of the Yonaguni Monument. The existence of these additional sites has broadened the context of the debate and has raised the intriguing possibility that whatever created the Yonaguni Monument, whether natural processes or human activity, also created similar formations at multiple other locations. Off the coast of the island of Aka, in the Kurama group of islands, divers have discovered what appears to be an underwater stone circle. This formation consists of large stones arranged in a roughly circular pattern on the seabed. The stones are roughly similar in size, and they are spaced at roughly regular intervals around the circumference of the circle. The formation is reminiscent of stone circles found on land throughout the world, from the henges of the British Isles to the stone circles of the Jōmon culture in mainland Japan. If the Aka stone circle is a genuine ancient structure, if it was built by human hands during a period of lower sea levels, it would be a significant discovery because stone circles are unambiguously artificial. Unlike terraces or flat surfaces, which can be produced by natural geological processes, a circle of large stones arranged at regular intervals on a flat surface is not something that natural processes produce. It is a configuration that requires human intention and human effort. However, the Aka stone circle has not been extensively studied, and its origin remains uncertain. Some researchers have suggested that it could be a natural formation, perhaps a ring of boulders left behind by the erosion of a softer surrounding rock, or a pattern created by the action of currents on a field of loose stones. Without detailed geological analysis and archaeological investigation, the question of whether the Aka stone circle is natural or artificial cannot be resolved. Near the island of Chatham, on the main island of Okinawa, divers have found what appear to be underwater walls and platforms. These features include long, straight, vertical surfaces that resemble retaining walls and broad, flat, horizontal surfaces that resemble paved floors or terraces. Some of these features are located at depths that would have been above water during periods of lower sea levels, which is consistent with the hypothesis that they were created by human activity during the last ice age. The Chatham features are particularly interesting because they are located near one of the most archaeologically rich areas in Okinawa, a region that has produced evidence of human habitation going back tens of thousands of years. The presence of underwater features that resemble man-made structures in an area that is known to have been inhabited by ancient peoples is suggestive, though not conclusive. Off the coast of the island of Yonaguni, northwest of Okinawa, divers have discovered what has been described as an underwater platform, a large, flat, horizontal surface of stone that appears to have been leveled and smoothed, with what look like retaining walls around its edges. The Yonaguni platform is located at a depth that would have been above water during the last glacial maximum, which is consistent with the hypothesis that it was constructed during a period of lower sea levels. And near the island of Ai, north of Okinawa, divers have found what appear to be underwater road-like formations, flat, level surfaces that extend for considerable distances along the seabed, following straight or gently curving paths. These road-like features are remarkable for their consistency, their uniform width, their level surfaces, their straight alignments, and they have been compared to ancient roads and processional ways found at terrestrial archaeological sites around the world. The cumulative effect of these multiple discoveries is significant. If each of these underwater formations were taken in isolation, it might be possible to dismiss it as a geological curiosity, a natural formation that happens to look artificial. But the fact that similar formations have been found at multiple locations throughout the Ryukyu archipelago, each showing similar characteristics, each located at depths consistent with ice age sea levels, creates a pattern that is harder to dismiss. Patterns matter in science. A single data point can be an anomaly. 2 data points can be a coincidence. But a pattern of data points spread across a wide geographic area and sharing common characteristics demands explanation. The pattern of underwater formations in the Ryukyu archipelago is consistent with the hypothesis that a widespread culture existed in the region during the last ice age, a culture that built or modified stone structures at multiple locations along the coast, structures that were subsequently submerged by rising sea levels. It is also consistent, of course, with the hypothesis that the geology of the Ryukyu region is particularly conducive to the formation of angular, geometric architecture-like features through natural processes. The Ryukyu archipelago sits on a continental shelf composed largely of layered sedimentary rocks, sandstones, mudstones, and limestones, that are susceptible to the kind of differential erosion and jointing that can produce terraced, stepped, and angular formations. If the geology of the region naturally produces formations that look artificial, then the presence of such formations at multiple locations would not be surprising and would not require the invocation of human activity. The challenge, as always, is to distinguish between these two hypotheses, and the challenge is made more difficult by the fact that both hypotheses make similar predictions about what we would expect to find on the seabed. Both predict angular geometric formations at multiple locations. Both predict formations at depths consistent with Ice Age sea levels. Both predict formations composed of local stone types. The hypotheses diverge in their predictions about specific details, the degree of geometric regularity, the presence or absence of tool marks, the presence or absence of artifacts, but these details are precisely the ones that are most difficult to evaluate in the underwater environment. The connection between the Yonaguni Monument and other ancient sites around the world has been a major theme in the work of alternative historians and independent researchers. Graham Hancock, in particular, has drawn extensive parallels between the Yonaguni Monument and submerged or coastal structures found in other parts of the world, arguing that these parallels point to the existence of a global maritime civilization during the last ice age. Hancock has pointed to the submerged city of Dwarka, off the coast of Gujarat in western India, as one of the most compelling parallels to Yonaguni. Dwarka is described in ancient Hindu texts as the legendary city of the god Krishna, a magnificent city of gold and precious stones that was swallowed by the sea at the end of Krishna's earthly life. In the 1980s and 90s, marine archaeologists discovered extensive underwater ruins off the coast of modern Dwarka, walls, foundations, and structural remains that have been dated to between 1500 and 3000 years ago. While these dates are much more recent than the proposed date for the Yonaguni Monument, the discovery of Dwarka demonstrated that the sea does indeed conceal the remains of ancient cities, and that legends of drowned cities can have a basis in historical fact. More recently, in 2002, sonar surveys off the coast of Gujarat revealed what appeared to be a much larger and much older submerged complex, a vast area of geometric formations at a depth of about 40 meters in the Gulf of Cambay. If genuine, this complex would date to a period when sea levels were low enough for the site to be above water, roughly 9,000 to 11,000 years ago. The Gulf of Cambay discovery has been controversial, with some researchers arguing that the sonar images show genuine man-made structures and others arguing that they show natural formations. The debate about the Gulf of Cambay closely parallels the debate about the Yonaguni Monument, and the two sites have often been discussed together by researchers who see them as parts of a larger pattern. In the Mediterranean, similar discoveries have been made. Off the coast of the Greek island of Zakynthos, divers discovered what appeared to be the remains of an ancient harbor, columns, paved surfaces, and what looked like the bases of pillars. However, subsequent investigation revealed that these features were natural, the products of a geological process in which bacteria living in the seafloor cement sediment grains together, creating pipe-like and disc-like formations that closely resemble architectural features. The Zakynthos discovery is often cited as a cautionary tale by skeptics, a reminder that natural processes can create formations that are virtually indistinguishable from man-made structures, even to trained eyes. Off the coast of Cuba in 2001, a team led by the engineer Paulina Zelitsky used sonar to survey the seabed at a depth of about 600 to 700 meters, far deeper than any known ancient coastal settlement. The sonar images appeared to show geometric formations, what looked like buildings, streets, and pyramids on the ocean floor. The discovery generated enormous excitement and extensive media coverage, but it has never been confirmed by direct investigation. The depth of the site makes it extremely difficult to access, and no submersible or remotely operated vehicle has ever obtained clear images of the formations. The Cuba underwater formations remain one of the great unsolved mysteries of marine archaeology. In the waters off the coast of Mahabalipuram in southern India, divers have discovered submerged temple structures that were once part of a large port city. Local legends speak of a magnificent city with 7 temples, of which only one survives above water. The underwater remains, discovered after the devastating tsunami of 2004, confirm that at least some of the legendary temples did exist and were inundated by the sea. The Mahabalipuram discovery is one of the clearest examples of a drowned architectural complex, a site where there is no doubt that the submerged structures are man-made and where the mechanism of submersion, a combination of sea level rise, tectonic subsidence, and coastal erosion, is well understood. These global parallels are important for the Yonaguni debate because they establish the broader context in which the monument exists. The sea has, throughout history, claimed human settlements. Cities, temples, harbors, and monuments have been submerged by rising sea levels, tectonic activity, and coastal erosion. The idea that a monumental structure could lie hidden beneath the waves is not speculative or far-fetched. It is a documented reality, a reality that has been confirmed again and again by discoveries in oceans and seas around the world. The question for Yonaguni is not whether ancient structures can be found underwater. They can. The question is whether this particular underwater formation is one of them. The role of tectonic activity in the Yonaguni story deserves careful consideration. The Ryukyu archipelago sits on one of the most tectonically active zones on Earth. It is located near the boundary between the Eurasian Plate and the Philippine Sea Plate, a zone of subduction where the oceanic crust of the Philippine Sea Plate is being driven beneath the continental crust of the Eurasian Plate. This subduction process generates earthquakes, volcanic activity, and crustal deformation on a scale that can dramatically alter the landscape and the seascape. Tectonic activity is relevant to the Yonaguni debate for several reasons. First, tectonic uplift and subsidence can change the elevation of the land surface relative to sea level. If the area around the Yonaguni Monument has been subjected to tectonic subsidence, if the crust in this area has sunk relative to its original position, then the monument could have been submerged not only by rising sea levels, but also by the sinking of the land on which it sits. This would mean that the monument could have been above water more recently than sea level data alone would suggest. Conversely, if the area has been subjected to tectonic uplift, the monument could have been above water less recently than sea level data would suggest. The tectonic history of the Yonaguni region is complex, and the precise amount of uplift or subsidence that has occurred at the monument's site is difficult to determine. Some researchers have argued that the region has been relatively stable, with little tectonic deformation since the formation of the monument. Others have argued that significant subsidence has occurred, which could have contributed to the monument's submersion. The tectonic question adds another layer of uncertainty to the already uncertain chronology of the site. Second, tectonic activity can create fractures and joints in rock. Earthquakes in particular can produce extensive networks of fractures that cut through large volumes of rock in regular, geometric patterns. If the Yonaguni Monument was subjected to significant seismic activity during or after its formation, the resulting fractures could explain some of the monument's angular, geometric features, its right angles, its straight edges, its flat surfaces. Seismically induced fractures can be remarkably regular, producing features that closely resemble the products of human stonework. This is an important point because it provides a natural mechanism for producing the kind of geometric regularity that is seen at the monument. If a large earthquake fractured the rock along two sets of vertical joints oriented at right angles to each other, and if subsequent erosion removed the loose material between the joints, the result could be a formation with flat surfaces, sharp right angles, and straight edges, exactly the features that have been cited as evidence of human modification. However, seismically induced fractures would not, by themselves, explain all of the monument's features. Fractures can produce flat surfaces and sharp angles, but they cannot produce uniformly spaced terraces, triangular depressions, circular holes, or representational carvings. These features require additional explanation, either through more complex natural processes or through human activity. Third, tectonic activity can destroy or obscure the evidence of human modification. If the monument was indeed modified by human hands, and if it was subsequently subjected to significant seismic activity, the earthquakes could have damaged or destroyed the evidence of that modification, breaking carved surfaces, displacing shaped stones, and creating new fractures that overprint and obscure the marks of human tools. This means that the absence of clear tool marks at the monument does not necessarily prove that no modification occurred. It might simply mean that the evidence has been destroyed by subsequent geological processes. The question of when the Yonaguni Monument was submerged is critical to the debate, and it is intimately connected to the broader question of post-glacial sea level rise in the Western Pacific. Sea level change is not a simple, uniform process. Global sea level has risen by roughly 120 to 130 meters since the last glacial maximum, but the rate of rise has varied dramatically over time. There have been periods of rapid rise, the meltwater pulses discussed earlier, and periods of relative stability. There have been periods when sea level rose by several meters per century, and periods when it rose by only a few centimeters per century. For the Yonaguni Monument, the critical question is when sea level in the vicinity of the monument passed the elevation of the monument's highest point, in other words, when the monument was fully submerged. Based on regional sea level data, this likely occurred sometime between 8,000 and 10,000 years ago, during the latter stages of the post-glacial marine transgression. Before that time, the monument, or at least its upper portions, would have been above water and accessible to human activity. But there is a complication. Sea level change is not the only factor that determines whether a given point of land is above or below water. Local factors, tectonic uplift or subsidence, isostatic adjustment, the slow rebound of the crust after the weight of ice sheets is removed, sediment accumulation and erosion can all affect the relative position of land and sea at a specific location. These local factors can cause the effective sea level at a particular site to differ from the global average by significant amounts. For the Yonaguni region, the most important local factor is likely tectonic subsidence. If the area around the monument has subsided since the last ice age, if the crust has slowly sunk relative to its original position, then the monument would have been submerged earlier than global sea level data alone would predict. Some researchers have estimated that the rate of tectonic subsidence in the Yonaguni area is on the order of a few millimeters per year, which over 10,000 years would amount to several meters of additional submersion. This would shift the timeline of submersion forward, meaning that the monument could have been above water as recently as 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, or possibly even more recently. The uncertainty in the timing of submersion is significant because it affects the range of dates during which the monument could have been modified by human hands. If the monument was above water until 8,000 years ago, then it could have been modified at any time up to 8,000 years ago. If it was above water until 6,000 years ago, the window extends to 6,000 years ago. And if local factors push the submersion date even more recently, the window could extend to within the range of the historical Jōmon period, a time when we know that people in the Ryukyu region were engaged in complex cultural activities. The comparison between the Yonaguni Monument and the known architectural traditions of the ancient world is another area that rewards careful examination. Proponents of the artificial hypothesis have drawn parallels between the monument and stepped pyramids, ziggurats, and terrace platforms found in cultures around the world. These parallels are visually striking, but their significance is debated. The stepped pyramid is one of the most widespread architectural forms in the ancient world. It is found in Egypt, where the stepped pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara is one of the earliest monumental stone structures in the world. It is found in Mesopotamia, where the ziggurats of Sumer, Babylon, and Assyria rose in terraced tiers from the flat plains of the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. It is found in Mesoamerica, where the Maya, the Aztecs, and their predecessors built massive stepped pyramids as temples and ceremonial platforms. It is found in Southeast Asia, where the terraced temple of Borobudur in Java and the stepped platforms of Angkor in Cambodia demonstrate the same architectural principle. And it is found in the Pacific, where the terraced platforms of Polynesian Mari and Micronesian temples show that the concept of a stepped, terraced ceremonial structure was known and practiced by maritime cultures across the ocean. The ubiquity of the stepped pyramid in the ancient world has been interpreted in different ways. Some researchers see it as evidence of independent invention, the idea that different cultures, facing similar problems and working with similar materials, independently arrived at similar architectural solutions. Others see it as evidence of diffusion, the spread of a single architectural concept from a single point of origin to cultures around the world through trade, migration, or cultural contact. And still others see it as evidence of a common origin, the idea that all of the world's stepped pyramids ultimately derive from a single ancestral tradition that predates the known civilizations and that has its roots in the deep past. If the Yonaguni Monument is a stepped pyramid, if it is a terraced platform built by human hands during the last ice age, then it would be among the earliest, if not the earliest, examples of this architectural form. It would predate the steppe pyramid of Djoser by thousands of years. It would predate the ziggurats of Mesopotamia by thousands of years. It would predate the pyramids of Mesoamerica by thousands of years. And it would raise the possibility that the tradition of stepped pyramid construction did not originate in the ancient Near East or in Mesoamerica, as is conventionally believed, but in the Western Pacific, in a region and at a time that the conventional historical timeline does not recognize as a center of monumental construction. This is one of the most revolutionary implications of the artificial hypothesis for the Yonaguni Monument. If it is confirmed, it would not simply add a new site to the list of ancient monuments. It would fundamentally alter our understanding of the origins and development of architecture, of the timeline of human cultural achievement, and of the relationships between ancient cultures in different parts of the world. The spiritual and ritual dimensions of the Yonaguni Monument deserve further exploration. In the first part of this narration, we discuss the Ryukyuan concept of Nurai Kanai, the mythical land beyond or beneath the sea from which the gods and ancestors come and to which the spirits of the dead return. We noted the parallels between this legend and the hypothesis that the Yonaguni Monument is a remnant of a drowned civilization. Now, let us examine these spiritual dimensions in more detail. The Ryukyu Islands have one of the richest and most complex spiritual traditions in all of East Asia. Ryukyuan religion is animistic. It is based on the belief that all things, including natural features of the landscape, are inhabited by spirits or kami. Mountains, rivers, forests, caves, springs, rocks, and the sea itself are all seen as sacred, as alive with spiritual power, as worthy of reverence and respect. In this worldview, a natural rock formation that resembles a face or an animal would not be dismissed as a coincidence. It would be seen as a sign, a manifestation of the spiritual power that inhabits the stone, a message from the kami that dwell within it. Such a formation would be treated as sacred. It would be a place of pilgrimage, a site for ritual offerings, a location where the Naro, the female spiritual leaders of Ryukyuan society, would conduct ceremonies and commune with the spirits. If the Yonaguni Monument was indeed a sacred site in the deep past, a natural formation that was treated as spiritually significant by the people who lived in the area, then the modifications that were made to it may have been ritual in nature rather than architectural. The carving of a face might have been an act of devotion, an attempt to make visible the spirit that was believed to inhabit the stone. The drilling of holes might have been for the placement of offerings or ritual objects. The smoothing of surfaces might have been to create clean, purified spaces for ceremony. The cutting of channels might have been to direct the flow of water in a ritually significant way, as water is a powerful spiritual symbol in many cultures. This interpretation, that the monument is a sacred natural formation that was ritually modified, is attractive because it bridges the gap between the natural and artificial hypotheses. It acknowledges the monument's fundamentally natural character while also acknowledging the evidence for human modification. And it is consistent with what we know about the spiritual practices of the Ryukyu Islands and with the broader pattern of human interaction with sacred landscapes throughout the ancient world. In many cultures, the most sacred sites are not buildings or temples in the conventional sense. They are natural features, mountains, caves, springs, rock formations that are believed to be inhabited by spiritual power. Humans modify these sites not to create architecture but to honor and enhance the spiritual power that already resides there. The modifications are minimal, a carved symbol here, a cleared pathway there, a smoothed surface for ceremony, but they are deliberate and purposeful. If the Yonaguni Monument is such a site, it would not be a city or a fortress or a temple in the conventional sense. It would be a sacred landscape, a place where the natural and the spiritual intersected, where human beings expressed their reverence for the powers of the earth and the sea through modest but meaningful modifications to the stone. The role of underwater archaeology in investigating the Yonaguni Monument has been limited by practical challenges. Underwater archaeology is, by its nature, more difficult, more expensive, and more time-consuming than terrestrial archaeology. Divers can spend only limited amounts of time on the seabed, especially at the depths at which the monument is located. Visibility underwater is often poor, making detailed observation and photography difficult. The currents around Yonaguni are strong and unpredictable, creating hazardous conditions for divers. And the tools and techniques that are available for underwater investigation, while they have improved dramatically in recent decades, are still less powerful and less precise than the tools available for terrestrial archaeology. Despite these challenges, several underwater archaeological investigations have been conducted at the Yonaguni Monument. These investigations have included detailed photographic surveys, video documentation, measurement and mapping of the monument's features, collection of stone and sediment samples, and examination of the monument's surfaces for evidence of tool marks and other signs of human modification. The results of these investigations have been mixed. Some researchers who have examined the monument firsthand have come away convinced that it is, at least in part, artificial. Others have come away convinced that it is entirely natural, and many have come away uncertain, impressed by the monument's visual resemblance to architecture, but unable to find the definitive evidence that would settle the question one way or the other. One of the most significant limitations of the investigations conducted so far is the lack of systematic excavation. In terrestrial archaeology, excavation, the careful, layer-by-layer removal of sediment and soil, is the primary method for recovering artifacts, analyzing stratigraphy, and determining the history of a site. Excavation at the Yonaguni Monument could potentially reveal artifacts, pottery, tools, bones, or other objects buried in the sediment at the base of the monument or trapped in crevices in the stone. Such artifacts would provide unambiguous evidence of human activity at the site and would go a long way toward resolving the debate. However, underwater excavation at the Yonaguni Monument has not been conducted on any significant scale. This is partly because of the practical difficulties of excavating underwater, the limited time that divers can spend on the seabed, the challenges of removing and screening sediment in a marine environment, the difficulty of maintaining precise stratigraphic control in conditions of poor visibility and strong currents. It is also partly because of regulatory and political obstacles. The monument is located in Japanese territorial waters, and any archaeological investigation would require permits and approvals from Japanese governmental authorities. Kimura and other researchers have called for a comprehensive, international, multidisciplinary investigation of the Yonaguni Monument, an investigation that would combine underwater archaeology, marine geology, photogrammetry, sonar imaging, sample analysis, and other methods in a coordinated effort to gather the data needed to resolve the debate. Such an investigation would be expensive and logistically complex, but it would represent the best hope for answering the questions that the monument has posed for nearly 4 decades. Until such an investigation is conducted, the Yonaguni Monument will remain what it has been since its discovery, a mystery wrapped in stone, submerged in water, and shrouded in ambiguity. Let us consider for a moment the scenario in which the Yonaguni Monument is confirmed as a man-made or human-modified structure. What would that mean? What would be the implications for our understanding of human history? The implications would be profound, far-reaching, and for many in the academic world, deeply unsettling. First, it would extend the timeline of monumental construction by thousands of years. The currently accepted earliest examples of monumental architecture, the temples of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, date to roughly 11,000 to 12,000 years ago. If the Yonaguni Monument is a man-made structure dating to 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, it would be roughly contemporary with Göbekli Tepe. If it is older, if it dates to 12,000 or 14,000 years ago, as some proponents have suggested, it could be even earlier than Göbekli Tepe, making it one of the oldest known monumental structures in the world. Second, it would demonstrate that monumental construction was not limited to a single region or a single cultural tradition. The currently known examples of early monumental architecture are concentrated in a relatively small area of the ancient Near East, principally Turkey and the Levant. If the Yonaguni Monument is a man-made structure, it would show that the capacity for monumental construction existed independently in the Western Pacific, on the other side of the world. This would suggest that the drive to build, to create permanent, large-scale structures of stone, is a more fundamental, more widespread, and more deeply rooted aspect of human culture than has previously been recognized. Third, it would force a reassessment of the capabilities of prehistoric peoples. The conventional view of Ice Age peoples is that they were primarily nomadic hunter-gatherers living in small bands, with limited social organization and limited technological capabilities. The Yonaguni Monument, if artificial, would challenge this view. It would demonstrate that at least some Ice Age peoples were capable of large-scale, organized construction projects, that they had the social organization, the technical skills, and the cultural motivation to undertake monumental works of stone architecture. Fourth, it would highlight the role of the sea in shaping human history. The post-glacial rise in sea levels is one of the most dramatic environmental changes that human societies have ever faced. It transformed coastlines, submerged entire landscapes, and displaced countless communities. If the Yonaguni Monument is a man-made structure that was lost to rising seas, it would serve as a powerful reminder of the scale and impact of this environmental transformation, and of the potential for significant archaeological evidence to lie hidden beneath the ocean. Fifth, it would raise the possibility that other, as yet undiscovered sites might exist on the submerged continental shelves of the world. If a monumental structure was built on the coast of what is now the Ryukyu archipelago during the last ice age, then similar structures might have been built on other coastlines that are now underwater, off the coasts of India, Southeast Asia, Australia, the Mediterranean, and elsewhere. The discovery of the Yonaguni Monument, if confirmed as artificial, would be not an endpoint but a beginning, the first glimpse of a vast, submerged archaeological landscape that we have only begun to explore. The idea that significant portions of human history lie hidden beneath the sea is not new. Archaeologists and geologists have been aware of the potential for submerged archaeological sites since at least the 19th century, when the first systematic studies of sea level change began to reveal the extent of the post-glacial marine transgression. But the practical challenges of underwater exploration have limited the amount of investigation that has been conducted on submerged landscapes, and the result is a significant gap in the archaeological record, a gap that the Yonaguni Monument, whatever its true nature, helps to illuminate. In recent years, there has been a growing interest in the systematic exploration of submerged landscapes. Advances in sonar technology, remotely operated vehicles, autonomous underwater vehicles, and underwater photogrammetry have made it possible to survey and document the seabed with a level of detail and precision that was not possible even a decade ago. These technologies are being used to map submerged coastlines, to identify potential archaeological sites on the continental shelves, and to investigate specific locations where submerged structures have been reported. Several major research programs are currently underway or in the planning stages. In Europe, the SPLASHCOS project, Submerged Prehistoric Archaeology and Landscapes of the Continental Shelf, has compiled a comprehensive database of known and suspected submerged prehistoric sites across the European continental shelf. The project has identified hundreds of locations where prehistoric artifacts, settlements, or landscapes have been found underwater, and it is working to develop a coordinated strategy for the investigation and preservation of these sites. In the North Sea, the Doggerland project has used seismic survey data collected by oil and gas companies to create detailed maps of the submerged landscape of Doggerland, the vast plain that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, which was inundated by rising sea levels roughly 8,000 years ago. The project has revealed a complex landscape of river valleys, lake basins, marshes, and hills, a landscape that was once home to Mesolithic hunter-gatherer communities whose settlements and artifacts now lie beneath the waves. In the Mediterranean, several projects are investigating submerged caves, harbors, and coastal settlements that were inundated by the post-glacial rise in sea levels. These projects have discovered underwater caves containing prehistoric art, submerged harbors with ancient ship remains, and coastal settlements with preserved architectural features. The Yonaguni Monument, whether natural or artificial, has played an important role in stimulating interest in the systematic exploration of submerged landscapes. It has drawn attention to the potential for significant discoveries on the ocean floor. It has demonstrated the power of underwater imaging and documentation techniques, and it has inspired a generation of researchers, divers, and explorers to look beneath the surface of the sea for evidence of the human past. The legacy of Masaaki Kimura deserves special attention. Kimura, who passed away in recent years, devoted the latter decades of his career to the study of the Yonaguni Monument. He was not a sensationalist. He was not a publicity seeker. He was a meticulous, methodical scientist who spent thousands of hours underwater, examining every square meter of the monument's surface, measuring every angle, documenting every feature. He published his findings in peer-reviewed journals. He presented his work at international conferences. He engaged with his critics openly and respectfully, responding to their objections with data and analysis rather than rhetoric. Kimura's work was not always well received by the mainstream scientific community. His claim that the monument was a human-modified structure was controversial, and some of his colleagues in the geological and archaeological establishment were skeptical of his conclusions. But he was never accused of fabricating data or misrepresenting evidence. His measurements, his photographs, and his maps were accurate and reliable. His interpretations were debatable, but his data were sound. Kimura's contribution to the Yonaguni debate cannot be overstated. Without his years of dedicated field work, the monument would be far less well understood than it is today. His detailed maps and measurements provide the foundation on which all subsequent research has been built. His photographs and video footage constitute the most comprehensive visual record of the monument's features. And his published analyses, whatever one thinks of his conclusions, represent the most thorough and most rigorous scientific examination of the monument that has ever been conducted. Kimura believed to the end of his life that the Yonaguni Monument was a human-modified structure. He believed that it was the remains of a civilization that had been lost to the sea, a chapter of human history that had been erased by the rising waters of the post-glacial period. He believed that the monument deserved recognition, preservation, and further investigation. And he believed that one day the evidence would be sufficient to convince even the most skeptical observers that the monument was not merely a geological curiosity, but a cultural treasure of incalculable value. Whether history will vindicate Kimura's beliefs remains to be seen. But there is no doubt that his work has made a lasting contribution to our understanding of one of the most enigmatic sites on Earth, and there is no doubt that his passion, his dedication, and his intellectual courage have inspired others to continue the investigation that he began. The legacy of Robert Schoch in this debate also deserves consideration. Schoch, who remains active in geological research and writing, brought a rigorous geological perspective to the Yonaguni debate that was essential for maintaining scientific standards. His insistence that the monument's features could be explained by natural geological processes was not a dismissal of the monument's significance. It was a reminder that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the burden of proof rests on those who propose extraordinary origins. Schoch's contribution was to establish a baseline, a geological model that could account for the monument's features without invoking human intervention. This baseline is essential because it defines what needs to be explained. If all of the monument's features can be accounted for by natural processes, then there is no need to invoke human activity. If, on the other hand, some features cannot be accounted for by natural processes, then those features require an alternative explanation, and human activity is one possible alternative. The value of Schoch's skepticism lies not in the answers it provides, but in the questions it raises. By challenging the claims of the artificial origin hypothesis, Schoch forced proponents to sharpen their arguments, to seek better evidence, and to develop more rigorous methods for distinguishing between natural and artificial features. This is how science works, through the dialectic of claim and critique, of hypothesis and counter-hypothesis, of evidence and counter-evidence. The debate between Kimura and Schoch, while sometimes contentious, was fundamentally a scientific debate, a disagreement about the interpretation of evidence, conducted within the framework of scientific inquiry. Interestingly, Schoch himself has noted that while he believes the monument is primarily natural, he cannot completely rule out the possibility that some human modification has occurred. He has acknowledged that the monument's features are unusual for a natural formation, and that the possibility of minimal human modification deserves further investigation. This openness to the possibility of a middle ground between the fully natural and the fully artificial is characteristic of Schoch's approach and reflects the genuine complexity of the evidence. As we approach the conclusion of our exploration, it is worth reflecting on what the Yonaguni Monument means not just as a scientific puzzle but as a cultural phenomenon. The Yonaguni Monument has captured the imagination of people around the world. It has been the subject of books, documentaries, television programs, magazine articles, and countless online discussions. It has been described as Japan's Atlantis, as the underwater pyramid, as the lost city beneath the sea. It has been interpreted through the lenses of science, mythology, spirituality, and popular culture. It has been embraced by New Age thinkers, alternative historians, and conspiracy theorists, and it has been investigated by credentialed scientists, professional geologists, and academic archaeologists. The breadth and intensity of public interest in the Yonaguni Monument reflect something deep about the human psyche. We are fascinated by mysteries. We are drawn to the unknown. We are captivated by the possibility that the past holds secrets that have yet to be revealed, that somewhere beneath the waves or buried in the earth or hidden in plain sight, there are wonders that we have not yet discovered, truths that we have not yet grasped, stories that we have not yet heard. The Yonaguni Monument taps into this fascination with extraordinary power. It combines several of the most potent themes in the human imagination: the mystery of the deep sea, the romance of lost civilizations, the grandeur of ancient monuments, the drama of catastrophic natural events, the thrill of discovery. It is a site that seems almost designed to captivate, a massive, mysterious structure lying in the crystal-clear waters of a tropical sea, waiting to be explored by anyone brave enough to strap on a tank of air and descend into the blue. But the public fascination with the Yonaguni Monument also carries risks. The desire to believe that the monument is a man-made structure can lead to confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret ambiguous evidence in ways that confirm one's pre-existing beliefs. The desire for a dramatic, world-changing discovery can lead to exaggeration, misrepresentation, and the selective presentation of evidence. The cultural narratives that surround the monument, narratives of lost civilizations, hidden truths, and suppressed knowledge, can create an environment in which critical thinking is devalued and skepticism is treated as close-mindedness. It is important to approach the Yonaguni Monument with both an open mind and a critical eye. Open-mindedness is essential because the evidence is genuinely ambiguous and because the possibility that the monument is a human creation cannot be dismissed out of hand. Critical thinking is essential because the evidence is genuinely ambiguous and because the possibility that the monument is a natural formation cannot be dismissed out of hand either. The truth, whatever it turns out to be, will be found not through wishful thinking or dogmatic skepticism, but through careful, rigorous, open-minded investigation. The future of Yonaguni Monument research holds both challenges and promise. The challenges are significant. The monument is located in a remote area, far from major research institutions and logistical support. The underwater environment makes investigation difficult, time-consuming, and expensive. The regulatory framework governing archaeological investigation in Japanese territorial waters adds bureaucratic complexity. And the ongoing debate about the monument's nature makes it difficult to secure funding for research, as many funding agencies are reluctant to support investigations of sites whose significance is disputed. But the promise is equally significant. New technologies are making it possible to study the monument in ways that were not possible before. High-resolution sonar can map the monument's features with centimeter-scale precision. Underwater LiDAR, a technology that uses laser light to create three-dimensional maps of underwater surfaces, has the potential to reveal subtle features that are invisible in conventional photography. Advanced chemical analysis techniques can determine the composition and origin of stone and sediment samples with unprecedented accuracy. And improvements in underwater robotics are making it possible to conduct detailed investigations at depths and for durations that would be impossible for human divers. There is also growing institutional interest in the systematic exploration of submerged landscapes. As the academic community becomes increasingly aware of the potential significance of sites on the submerged continental shelves, there is increasing support for the development of the methods, technologies, and institutional frameworks needed to investigate these sites. The Yonaguni Monument, as one of the most prominent and most debated examples of a potentially significant submerged site, is likely to benefit from this growing interest. Several proposals for future research at the Yonaguni Monument have been put forward. These include comprehensive photogrammetric surveys using the latest imaging technologies, systematic sampling of stone and sediment for geological and chemical analysis, targeted excavation of sediment deposits at the base of the monument and in crevices within the monument, sonar surveys of the broader seabed around the monument to identify additional features, and detailed comparison of the monument's features to known natural and artificial formations in similar geological settings. If these proposals are implemented, they could potentially provide the data needed to resolve the debate, or at least to significantly narrow the range of plausible interpretations. The key question, whether the monument's features were shaped by natural processes alone or whether human modification played a role is, in principle, answerable. The evidence exists. It is waiting on the ocean floor, in the stone and sediment and marine life that have accumulated on the monument's surfaces over thousands of years. What is needed is the will, the resources, and the expertise to collect and analyze that evidence. There is a philosophical dimension to the Yonaguni debate that is worth exploring as we near the end of our journey. The debate is not simply about a rock formation. It is about how we think about the past, how we construct narratives of human history, and how we deal with evidence that does not fit neatly into existing frameworks. The conventional narrative of human history is a narrative of progress, from simple to complex, from primitive to advanced, from small scale to large scale. In this narrative, human societies began as small bands of hunter-gatherers, gradually developed agriculture, slowly built the first settlements and cities, and eventually created the complex civilizations that we know from the historical record. The trajectory is upward, from less to more, from simpler to more complex, from humbler to more magnificent. The Yonaguni Monument challenges this narrative. If it is a man-made structure, it suggests that the trajectory of human development was not always upward, that there were moments in the deep past when human societies achieved levels of complexity and capability that were subsequently lost, forgotten, and only recently rediscovered. It suggests that the story of human civilization is not a simple line from past to present, but a more complex, more cyclical, more unpredictable story. A story with peaks and valleys, with advances and retreats, with achievements that were made and then unmade by the forces of nature. This idea that civilizations can be lost, that achievements can be forgotten, that the past can hold surprises that the present does not anticipate, is not new. It is a theme that runs through human mythology, from the story of Atlantis in Plato's dialogues to the legends of the Great Flood found in cultures around the world. It is a theme that resonates with the human experience because human societies do rise and fall, and the achievements of one generation are not always preserved for the next. The Yonaguni Monument, whether natural or artificial, serves as a reminder of this theme. It reminds us that the past is deeper and more complex than we often imagine. It reminds us that the sea holds secrets that we have not yet uncovered. It reminds us that the story of human civilization may have chapters that we have not yet read, chapters that are written not in words but in stone, not on paper but on the ocean floor, waiting to be deciphered by those with the curiosity, the courage, and the humility to look. The people of Yonaguni Island continue to live their lives in the shadow of the monument, or rather above it, on the surface of the sea that conceals it. They fish in the waters where the monument lies. They dive on it, guide tourists to it, and take pride in the attention it has brought to their small, remote island. For them, the monument is not an abstract scientific question. It is a part of their landscape, their livelihood, and their identity. The relationship between the people of Yonaguni and the monument is a reminder that archaeological sites are not just objects of scientific study. They are places that exist in a specific physical, cultural, and social context, places that have meaning and significance for the people who live near them. The Yonaguni Monument belongs, in the deepest sense, to the people of Yonaguni. It is their heritage, their mystery, their source of wonder. And it is a source of wonder for the people of Yonaguni, for the scientists who study it, for the divers who explore it, and for the millions of people around the world who have encountered it through books, documentaries, and the internet. The Yonaguni Monument is one of those rare phenomena that transcends the boundaries of science and culture, speaking to something universal in the human spirit, our desire to know, our fascination with the unknown, our longing for connection with the deep past. As our exploration of the Yonaguni Monument draws to a close, let us return one final time to the ocean floor, to the stone terraces and the silent depths where the monument waits. Imagine yourself descending through the warm, clear waters off the southern coast of Yonaguni Island. The surface recedes above you, a shimmering ceiling of light crossed by the shadows of waves. The water around you is a deep, luminous blue, alive with schools of tropical fish that flash and shimmer as they catch the light. The current tugs gently at your body, pulling you southward toward the open ocean. And then, rising from the sandy floor below you, you see it. A shape so massive, so geometrical, so imposing that it seems to belong to another world. Broad, flat terraces stretch out before you, one stacked above another, like the steps of a staircase built for beings far larger than human. Sharp right angles cut through the stone with a precision that seems impossible, alien, almost mechanical. Straight edges run for meters without deviation, tracing lines so regular that they seem drawn with a ruler. Vertical walls rise from horizontal platforms, creating spaces that feel enclosed, deliberate, purposeful. You swim closer, your heart pounding, your mind racing. You run your fingers along the surface of the stone. It is smooth in some places, rough in others. Marine life clings to it, corals, sponges, anemones, the delicate tendrils of feather stars. Fish dart in and out of crevices. A sea turtle glides past, indifferent to your presence, indifferent to the mystery that surrounds it. You reach a feature that looks like a face, two depressions that look like eyes, a ridge that looks like a nose, a horizontal groove that looks like a mouth. Is it a face? Is it a trick of the light, a trick of the mind, a coincidence of erosion? Or is it something more, a message from the deep past, carved in stone by hands that have been dust for millennia, waiting for someone someday to come and see it? You do not know, you cannot know, not yet, but you feel something, a sense of awe, of wonder, of connection to something vast and ancient and unfathomable. You feel the weight of time pressing down on you, as heavy as the water above. You feel the presence of the past, as palpable as the stone beneath your fingers. And you feel the pull of the unknown, as powerful and as irresistible as the current that flows through these waters. The Yonaguni Monument is still here. It has been here for thousands of years. It will be here for thousands more, patient, silent, waiting. The question remains open. Is the Yonaguni Monument a masterpiece of nature, a formation so extraordinary, so geometrically precise, so visually stunning that it has fooled even trained observers into seeing the hand of humanity where only the hand of geology exists? Or is it a masterpiece of human creation, a monument built by a civilization that we have forgotten, drowned by the rising seas that swallowed the coastlines of the Ice Age world, preserved on the ocean floor for millennia as a silent testament to the capabilities and the ambitions of our distant ancestors? The answer matters. It matters for science because it would reshape our understanding of geological processes or human history, depending on which answer proves correct. It matters for culture because it would alter our narrative of who we are, where we came from, and what our ancestors were capable of. And it matters for the future because it would demonstrate either the extraordinary creativity of nature or the extraordinary resilience of human achievement, both of which are themes of profound significance for a species facing its own environmental challenges. But perhaps what matters most is not the answer itself, but the question. The fact that the Yonaguni Monument poses this question, that it forces us to confront the limits of our knowledge, to acknowledge the vastness of what we do not know, and to remain humble in the face of evidence that defies easy explanation, is itself a gift. It is a gift of mystery, of wonder, of intellectual humility. It is a reminder that the world is larger, deeper, and more complex than we imagine, that there are still discoveries to be made, still secrets to be uncovered, still chapters of the human story to be written. The ocean does not give up its secrets easily, but it does give them up in time to those who are patient, persistent, and willing to look. The Yonaguni Monument has been waiting beneath the waves for thousands of years. It can wait a little longer. But somewhere right now, a researcher is analyzing a photograph. A geologist is examining a sample of stone. A diver is strapping on a tank of air and preparing to descend into the warm, clear waters off the coast of Yonaguni Island. The investigation continues. The search for answers goes on, and the monument, patient, silent, immovable, waits. One day the truth will surface. One day the stone will speak. One day we will know whether the Yonaguni Monument is a wonder of nature or a wonder of humanity. And on that day, whether the answer brings confirmation of geological genius or revelation of human genius lost to time, the world will be richer for having asked the question. Until then, the monument endures, beneath the waves, beneath the years, beneath beneath the layers of mystery and controversy and wonder that have accumulated upon it like the marine life that clings to its ancient surfaces. It endures as stone endures, quietly, stubbornly, eternally, and the sea, the great keeper of secrets, holds it close. The story of the Yonaguni Monument is not over. It is, in many ways, just beginning. The technologies that will enable its definitive investigation are being developed. The institutional frameworks that will support that investigation are being built. The researchers who will lead that investigation are being trained. The questions that the monument poses about geology, about archaeology, about the capabilities of ancient peoples, about the role of the sea in human history are more relevant now than ever before. We live in an age of discovery, an age when new technologies are enabling us to explore the planet's last frontiers, from the depths of the ocean to the surface of other worlds. The exploration of submerged landscapes is one of the most exciting and most promising frontiers of modern science. It is a frontier that holds the potential to transform our understanding of the human past, to reveal civilizations and achievements that we have forgotten or never known, and to connect us to a deeper, richer, more complex history than we have ever imagined. The Yonaguni Monument stands at the threshold of this frontier. It is a gateway, a portal to the submerged past, a window into a world that was once above water and is now below, a bridge between the world we know and the world we have lost. Whether it proves to be a natural wonder or a human wonder, it has already accomplished something remarkable. It has opened our eyes to the possibility that the ocean floor holds more than sand and rock and coral. It holds memory. It holds history. It holds the traces of a world that was once ours and that the sea has claimed. The Yonaguni Monument is an invitation to explore, an invitation to question, an invitation to imagine, an invitation to dive beneath the surface of the sea, beneath the surface of the past, beneath the surface of our own assumptions about what is possible and what is not. The invitation is open, the monument is waiting, the ocean is deep. And the truth, whatever it is down there, somewhere in the blue, patient and eternal, carved in stone or shaped by water, waiting for the moment when human curiosity and human courage bring it at last into the light.